Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? I kept deciding whether we're going to have a little rain today or whether we're going to have some sunshine, maybe a little bit of both. City looks beautiful this week, though. Well, I'm Remer Bushard. I'm a professor and senior associate dean here at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, and my primary job is to just welcome you and tell you how much we appreciate you being here, and then very quickly get out of the way so these other talented and inspirational speakers can share their insights with you. But if you'll give me just a few minutes, since I have a pulpit here, I wanted to offer just a few comments. First, I really want to express a heartfelt thank you to the Sung family, who is just the inspiration and the passion and leadership behind this work. And having remembered when we all came together and we launched this office in 2017, and to see now how quickly and how fast we've grown, the momentum that's being built just in a couple short years is really impressive. And it gives me great hope for the work in the years ahead that will continue to grow. So thank you so much for your leadership and passion. We are deeply grateful for that. Also want to thank Drs. John Pan, Lee Frame, Leslie Davidson, and Janet Rodriguez for making it everything work on a day-to-day basis. We are lucky to have them as there's one of them right there, working behind the scenes. Thank you, Janet. Really, they work hard to advance this vision we have for integrative medicine and health. The division I oversee here at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, which is called GW Health Sciences, it really exists to drive innovation and quality in health and healthcare delivery, and we do that through education, scholarship, and service. And so today's symposium and all the work that has preceded today's event and the work that will follow it, it really symbolizes that need to drive innovation and improve the quality and the person-centeredness of the care we provide patients and families in our community. And so I'm really excited about this symposium and the work of the office in particular because it's so closely aligned with our vision for health sciences and the School of Medicine and Health Sciences. As a primary care provider myself and a translational scientist, my work is focused on the care of older adults, and in particular those from vulnerable populations or disadvantaged backgrounds. And my work is largely focused on helping to try to avoid drug injury and also the unnecessary prescribing of medications for older patients. We tend to overdo things here in the United States a little bit, get a little more disease focused than we should. And so as a result of my own personal experience, I know each of you have your own lens, the work in the field of integrative medicine health is personally resonating. It speaks to that need to be holistic, to be person-centered and community-centered, and to think about the whole patient. So I really am just grateful for the folks that are here and for you to be here to support this initiative and endeavor, and really new way of thinking about how we care for our communities. The families and communities I've served, and probably for those of you that are in healthcare will agree, they want and deserve healthcare that integrates together their emotional, their mental, and their physical sense of well-being. They want to think about health, not disease. And so I'm so excited about this work. So I was thinking about, and I was reading a little bit about speakers, and when I've read their books, I love both. But as I was thinking a little bit about what they're going to talk with you today, I was reminded of an event I attended in the very rural part of the Appalachian Mountains a few years ago. And Dr. Regina Benjamin, who is a former U.S. Surgeon General, I don't know if any of you had a chance to sort of follow her, know her, very inspirational. One of the things she really said is that we needed to shift the conversation in the U.S. away from disease and towards health. And she spoke, and I know that's not a new concept, but she spoke about it with such passion. And I think the symposium today is a part of that, how we really need to think about health if we're going to move ahead, not just to be able to create a better life for our families and communities, but also finance this healthcare system that we have in a sustainable way in the U.S. So I'm just grateful for each of you being here. I want to just welcome you again to GW. I know you're going to enjoy, as I will, the insights and experience of our two very distinguished speakers, and I look forward to being in the audience with the rest of you. And so with that, I might ask Dr. John Pan to come up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Remer. And you all know that without Remer, nothing of this is going to happen, right? So, I'm John Pan. I'm a 1970 graduate of GW University Medical Center. So I like to claim I was the original Doogie Howser. I graduated when I was 13. So So I also can claim to be the founder of the Center for Integrative Medicine at GW, the clinical center. And now I'm the founding medical director of the Office of Integrative Medicine and Health. But most importantly, I am still, I hope, a good friend of Pat and Marguerite Sung. And they basically funded the establishment of the Office of Integrative Medicine and Health, and for which I'm very grateful. I also have to thank AIM, my buddy Mikhail Kogan, for helping us in organizing this symposium. So what we are addressing this morning is the revolution that's happening in the field of microbiome and gut health, and also in terms of mind-body medicine and mental health. So it's opening the door wide open to an area that we can manage health more effectively, giving us more tools. Our Theodore Cynthia Birnbaum Memorial speakers are Emeran Mayer and Dr. Helen Lavretsky. And we are really honored to have both of them here, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot from them today. So as a housekeeping schedule change, Dr. Mayer is so popular that he's running off after his speech to Germany, Bavaria, somewhere across the pond to attend another conference. So he's running off as soon as his talk is over, after taking questions and answers. We'll have a short break, and then Dr. Lavretsky will continue with the program. And afterwards, we're followed by a panel, and the panel members are Dr. Lee Frame, who will lead the discussion panel, Dr. Lavretsky, Dr. Neal Barnard, who's, we've known each other for many, many years, and we're intersecting now. So he is the adjunct associate professor of medicine, and he's the president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And Mikhail Kogan, who has taken over my position at the Center for Integrative Medicine at GW, and he's the medical director. And we also have Scott Jackson. I don't want to tell you what's his most important position, but but he certainly is important because he leads the complex microbial system group at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So I'll let him explain what that is. And most importantly is that we have a patient who's going to be represented on the panel. So thank you very much for coming, Judi Eskovitz. Is she here? Oh, she's not here yet. Oh, okay. So thank you for all coming, and now I'm going to hand it over to Lee.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Lee Frame, and I'm the program director for integrative medicine here. We have a master's degree program in integrative medicine, and it's one of the leaders in the field, and I would argue probably the most evidence-based. So if you know anyone who's looking to get a good grounding in integrative medicine, please send them our way. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Emeran Mayer. He received his combined MD-PhD degree from the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany. He completed his residency at the Vancouver General Hospital in Vancouver, Canada, and his gastrointestinal fellowship training at the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA, as we must know it. Dr. Mayer has a career-long interest in clinical research aspects of brain-body interactions, with a long-standing focus on the bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut in health and disease. He's recognized as one of the leading investigators in the world of brain-gut interactions in GI disorders, including functional and inflammatory bowel disorders and obesity, with continual NIH funding since 1989, which is pretty impressive. Dr. Mayer is a professor of physiology and psychiatry in the Division of Digestive Diseases at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He's also the executive director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience and co-director of CURE, Digestive Diseases Research Center at UCLA. And he's also the best-selling author of The Mind-Gut Connection, How the Hidden Conversation Within Our Bodies Impacts Our Mood and Our Choices and Our Overall Health. Please welcome Dr. Emeran Mayer.
Thank you, Lee, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. I'd like to thank the Song family as well and John Penn. So we realized that our connection goes back a couple of decades when we were both part of the early phases of the collaborative centers of integrative medicine, academic centers of integrative medicine, a long time ago. Just for myself, I have a career-long interest in brain-body interactions. That's why I went into medical school. I'm a relative, considering my length of career, relative newcomer to the microbiome field, and we got into this because it became logical that if you're interested in brain-gut interactions, that you have to include the microbiome. That dawned on us about 7 or 8 years ago, and since then, so really been passionate about this topic. I'm going to give you sort of a tour de force through an area that ranges really from the gut, from the brain, the gut, to the planet, to the soil. And it will be fast, a lot of slides, but I did want to do this because I've become really passionate about looking at this connection, not just the gut and the brain, but also how this relates to the larger environment in which we live in. So I have some potential conflict of interest, but don't receive money from these entities. It's not stopped working with the pharmaceutical industry some 10 years ago, and none of the things that I'm showing was really related to these commercial entities. One thing that became pretty clear to us that we had to amend the concept that we had of brain-gut interactions. So 10 years ago, this looked a lot simpler. So you had a brain and a gut, and there was a circular connection. So in the meantime, we know there's multiple loops involved in this, including in the body, the brain immune loop, the microbiome immune loop, direct loop between the microbiome and the brain. But one thing became very important is that we're also very closely connected with a extensive loop with the environment, particularly, as you'll see at the end, the soil microbiome. The connections with the environment are both in terms of psychosocial factors, but also importantly in terms of diet. So it's really a holistic view. I'm sure 10 years from now, this will further expand and get more complicated as we learn more about this, but I think it's a framework that I'll base my presentation on. So rather than give you the summary at the end, I'll start out with the summary at the beginning. So after that, you could basically turn off your attention. So the key points that I want to make is that communication between the gut microbiome and the brain is an ubiquitous, ancient, evolutionary conserved system that modulates host behavior. This communication connects the mind, the gut, food, and the environment in a way that can best be understood in a systems biological way, not in a reductionistic linear way. Key components of plant-based diets act through the gut microbiome to produce gut and brain health. And the soil microbiome has a major influence on the health of the plants, the gut microbiome, and the brain. If you get deeper into this, you realize that many of our problems of health go all the way back to what we're doing with the soil and the food that the way we grow the food in this current industrial environment. Let me start out with the brain-gut microbiome axis. So there's a ubiquitous, this is not something new that started 10 years ago when the first papers came out about, hard to believe, these early papers, that somehow the gut microbiome played a role in modulating or influencing the behavior of laboratory mice. In the meantime, we realized there's a lot of evidence that has been accumulating even before that. So now we know the affective, social, pain-related, and digestive behavior of mice is in some ways influenced by the gut microbiome. We know that mating preferences, locomotion, aging in insects, social interaction and communication in hyenas. Then we also know that there's a relationship between the gut microbiome and molecular processes in the brain. And we'll talk about this a lot more. There's a lot of things, the last composite of this, which has been found really by comparing mice that have been grown up in a germ-free environment, so-called germ-free or notobiotic mice, and mice with a normal means normal for the laboratory environment, which is definitely not normal for wild mice. But anyway, so we know that if you take away the microbes in the gut, there's a lot of developmental changes that happen in most of the brain function and developmental function. As humans, we have co-evolved with trillions of these microorganisms that inhabit the human body. The problem, they are invisible, so we haven't really paid much attention. What we don't see or feel directly, we have not paid attention. So this went unnoticed until not that long ago, and now obviously there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of data that we have microbial ecosystems that are distinct in each of those locations, different parts of the body. One of the earliest ones was the stomach, so H. pylori, that organism that was detected and then it's been implicated as a major risk factor for peptic ulcer disease, not the cause, but a major risk factor. But now we know there's also a microbiome in the mouth plays a major role in tooth decay and gum disease. Even around the belly button, a unique distribution of compositional microbiomes. Every part of the body or the skin has a unique set of these microbial communities, which strangely don't mix. So every time I take a shower, you would think they were all mixed up. They're so uniquely adapted to their unique environment. And the same thing probably happens inside of us. So those are in the small intestine, the stomach, the large intestine, have all their own properties and stay where they are. In the intestine, this is clearly the area of great interest here. And in the large intestine, the largest concentration of these microbes, hundreds of trillions, probably in the universe in one place. So why would there any connection between the microbes in our gut and brain functions? Always compare this. So the dirtiest organ in the body and the cleanest, most sophisticated supercomputer in our brain. Well, you have to go back in evolution and you realize that for over 3.5 billion years, microbes have inhabited, were the only inhabitants of the oceans of the world, had a lot of time to develop their communication skills, develop the language. Some 500 million years ago, they settled, one of these microorganisms, an algae, settled in a unique animal, one of the first marine animals, this what's called a hydra, basically a floating digestive tube with a nerve net around it. And some of these algae settled inside of that floating tube, got free transportation, free and constant delivery of nutrients, and was protected. So it turned out to be very advantageous. And because of this design principle has persisted throughout evolution, virtually every animal that exists today, from flies to rats to hyenas to elephants and humans, have maintained that symbiotic relationship with the microbial world. What we had known for some time, that is shown on the left side, what microbes do is they break down molecules that we don't have the machinery in the small intestine to break down and absorb. These elements of food were very prominent early in our evolution. So our ancestors and even our primate cousins had mainly a plant-based diet, had even more of these. So the specialization was to break down these molecules, and different ones, fiber, plant-based fiber, resistant starch, one of the major ones, turn them into short-chain fatty acids and then could be absorbed in the colon. Substances called lignans, which will turn into phytoestrogens, polyphenols turn into secondary metabolites, and also what we call xenobiotics, so molecules that these microbes have never seen in their billions of years of evolution. They're able to break them down into metabolites of these, and sometimes we're not even aware what those metabolites of drugs or pesticides then do to our health. On the right side is, so these breakdown products are not, they don't stay in the gut. It's been shown that they function as signaling molecules to most of our other organ systems, including the cardiovascular system, the immune system, enteric nervous system, but also brain and behavior. Just to get us sort of an idea of the magnitude of this system is that, so we all know we have about 20,000 human genes, but we have realized that we have up to 20 million microbial genes. The function of many of these genes is still not known, so there's a big question mark and what's coming up in the future. What's to me most interesting that we could write our textbooks and practice medicine by ignoring 99% of the total gene pool of what's been called a holobiome, basically the microbes and the humans together. This is obviously a huge opportunity for future development and treatment and diagnostic possibilities, that we have a lot of unknown substances that are potentially of benefit for health. This concept that these breakdown products of microbes that produce these signaling molecules, it's very complicated. It's not just that we have tons of genes, millions of genes. We also have, it's been estimated, hundreds of thousands of these metabolites. And they don't act by themselves, but there's networks of these metabolites, so the metabolome. Anytime we deal with multiple elements, we give it an -ome ending. And it's really the end result of these interactions with these metabolites that have then the effect on human health. A very daunting task for the pharmaceutical industry, obviously. So on one side, a huge opportunity. On the other hand, a daunting task to figure out, this is not the traditional pharmaceutical model where you identify one molecule, one receptor. You have to really look at what these interactions of these molecules do ultimately to human health and what role they play in disease. Let me give you a couple of examples how the microbes can talk to our systems in our body. So the communication with the immune system is obvious. There have to be a close communication because these trillions of microbes are only separated by microns from the gut-based immune system. The majority of our immune system is located in the gut, so-called gut-associated immune system. And what you see here on this on the schematic is you have the lumen of the gut. You have a mucus layer which separates the microbes from it's called the epithelial layer or the lining of the gut. And then you have the immune system right underneath that epithelial layer. It's been shown that certain microbes, beneficial microbes, can they produce these metabolites like the short-chain fatty acids, butyrate or others that can interact with the epithelial system and affect certain immune molecules in a different ways during development. Early on, in training the immune system to recognize things that are bad and good for us, but also later to have a highly functioning immune system that does not result in inflammation. So if you imagine this design, an amazing engineering design, you put trillions of potentially harmful molecules or organisms right next to the immune system that could cause havoc within the body, that evolution was able to separate those two, even though they're so close together, by the gut barrier, the mucus layer, and the epithelial layer, which normally under intact conditions are very tight and will not let anything go through. On the right side, you can see what can happen in situations of inflammation. It's an example from inflammatory bowel disease. The point that I want to emphasize is the immune cells that receive these signals from the microbes, not all of them stay in the gut. They actually, so here are some of these molecules that make it to the immune system. So they activate dendritic cells, a subtype of immune cells. These dendritic cells produce cytokines, inflammatory molecules. These cytokines, some of them can go through the blood-brain barrier, either directly or through a mechanism that sort of jumps across this blood-brain barrier, get in contact with microbial cells. More than half the cells in the brain are not nerve cells, but these immune-like cells, which again produce cytokines, which affect nerve cells, neurons. And this is this phenomenon that many people have learned when they have, or tend to assume when they have conditions like brain fog or lack of concentration, so chronic fatigue. It's thought that some kind of a neuroinflammation plays a role. We also think that if this situation persists long enough, that you can get neurodegeneration as we have it associated with cognitive decline. So a very well-studied connection between the microbes in the gut barrier, the immune system, and then what happens upstream towards systems within the brain. Another communication channel, so imagine the microbes and the brain interact via different communication channels. So this is this neuroendocrine channel. We also know quite a bit about this. So in green, you see a specialized cell that's embedded in this epithelial layer in the gut. These cells are called enterochromaffin cells. And so in the meantime, everybody knows about this, but a few years ago, we had this talk in psychiatry. Psychiatrists was out, how can so much serotonin be in the gut? 99% of the serotonin in our body is stored and synthesized in these cells. This enzyme TPH is the rate-limiting enzyme that produces serotonin from tryptophan. And here comes the amazing story. The microbes, these spore-forming Clostridiales, have been shown to produce metabolites, such as these short-chain fatty acids from plant-based foods and secondary bile acids that stimulate this enzyme to produce serotonin. It's been estimated that 60% of that stimulus, that serotonin production, is influenced by the microbes. And what's equally interesting is that so the microbes can't produce serotonin themselves, so they stimulate these cells. These cells release serotonin back into the gut, and then the serotonin molecules in the gut interact with the microbes. It's recently, Elaine Chao, collaborator at UCLA, it's recently shown, it's not published yet, that some of these microbes contain the serotonin reuptake mechanisms, serotonin transporter. So they actually transport the serotonin into the cells. So when you take an SSRI, an antidepressant, it doesn't just affect the brain, it affects these enterochromaffin cells and the microbes as well. What effect this has overall on this communication system, we don't know yet. If you eat, another thing that's important now, if you eat a lot of tryptophan-containing foods, it will stimulate these microbes to produce more of the serotonin. That's also really intriguing because serotonin, these cells are connected via synapses to vagal afferent nerves that carry that signal, the serotonin signal, directly into brain limbic and autonomic centers. So this gives you a good illustration of how food, the microbes, the gut, specialized cells in the gut, and the brain interact. and almost certainly play some role in the regulation of our mood states and emotional states. Exactly what role that is, we know this in mice, but we can't really say this in humans yet. Similar situation for another type of cell, the enteroendocrine cells. I said earlier, the biggest part of the immune system is in the gut. It's also the biggest part of the endocrine system is in our gut, distributed in all these different cell types. So the satiety hormones that are released when you eat a meal, and these meal components interact with these cells, release these satiety hormones, which are supposed to shut off your appetite and your craving for food. Very similar design so we always thought it's the food that directly interacts with these cells, but now we know that microbes also through this mechanism of short-chain fatty acids have a major effect on the release of these satiety molecules, which then go both in the systemic circulation, reach the brain, but they also go through that same mechanism of an endocrine neural connection into the nucleus tractus solitarius. And so this seems to be a general design principle. And yes?
So what's the SCFA stand for?
Short-chain fatty acids. So I started in the beginning saying that the main breakdown product of plant fiber are short-chain fatty acids. Certainly not the only one. There's 400,000 metabolites. But one that's particularly well studied are these molecules. And so what I'm telling you here is a very reductionistic view. Just imagine that tens of thousands of metabolites produced by the microbes interact with these cells that determine our well-being, our mood state, and our appetite. Don't look at any details of this. I just want to say something. Microbes, based all on animal studies, play a major role in brain development. I come back to this concept again. The first 3 years of life is a period where your gut microbiome is programmed with a lot of interactions with the developing brain. So many essential brain development steps, so the blood-brain barrier, development of brain's neurogenesis, the microglia regulation, myelination of parts of the nervous system, and neural survival, growth, and signaling have all been shown to be influenced by some of these microbial metabolites. So the brain that we have the development is to a big degree influenced what happens early on in life, and that's why these germ-free animals that grow up without any microbes have major defects in any of these neuronal developmental phases. And that's summarized here. So during a lifetime, there's different stages where diseases develop and where the microbiome has been implicated. So developmental disorders, many diseases of the brain are considered developmental disorders. They don't just start when you're 40 or 50, but they have a long trajectory. And the role that interactions of the microbiome with the brain, this interaction has most likely a major influence during this phase. If I had to pick one period in lifetime where I think that it has to get the most bang for the buck if you intervene or understand this, is during this 3-year developmental period. And it's just like a software, like an operating system. Once that operating system is laid down, it will stay with you for the rest of your life. You can put on different programs, but the operating system will essentially stay the same. It's kind of ironic that we don't really pay that much attention to this. If you think about all the things that can go wrong and influence this developmental phase, from disease of the mother, nutrition of the mother, stress that the mother is experienced during pregnancy, all of these have been shown in animal models have an effect on the development of the infant's microbiome. Obviously, the antibiotic intake, which is vast, I forgot if I brought that slide with me, but by the age of 3 years, there's I think 2.5 doses of antibiotics that kids get, even today with all the data we know about this. And then there's clearly, after delivery, the mode of delivery and the early diet, breastfeeding, which is influenced by the diet of the mother. So we haven't really paid that much attention to it. I think this is one area that will need a lot of attention for nutritionists, for OBGYN physicians, to really minimize the damage that we do during this crucial operating phase. So here are the numbers. It's staggering, particularly the last one, almost 3 courses by the age of 2, 11 courses by the age of 10. Every time, if you take as an adult an antibiotic, it has a transient effect, and it will come back, most people, to the pre-antibiotic stage. If you do this in an infant with a developing gut microbiome, it will decrease and probably even lead to the extinction of certain species of microbes. One way that I like to sort of demonstrate this, what happens early in life. So from a systems biology or ecosystem viewpoint, so this is a landscape of stable states and unstable states within the microbiome. The deeper the holes are, the more stable that state is. That state is determined by the microbial diversity and abundance. So the more diverse, the more stable that system is, the deeper the stability holes are. So early life experiences and genetics are the main factors that influence the creation of that stability landscape. Now, what happens later, particularly in North America, Western world in general, we are in a pretty unhealthy diet overall. So the microbiome and this complicated system is exposed to often a lifelong exposure of things, and we'll come back to this, that will have an influence on not on the operating system, but on the relative functioning of our microbiome, with influences on other functions of the body. Metabolic syndrome, the epidemic that we're currently going through, is a good example, and the microbiome has been involved in this. And then one area that's received a lot of attention recently in terms of funding is also the possible role of a lifelong exposure to an unhealthy environment for the microbes in terms of increasing the risk for neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and cognitive decline. There are big NIH studies, multi-center NIH studies going on to evaluate this role. So coming back to the stability landscape, in bolded, you see the factors that as an adult, what the system that was programmed early in life is exposed to. So perturbations that can be that can be stressful life events, diet, this is on the left side, mind-brain factors, perturbations also, chemicals, and exposure to potentially harmful substances, and lifestyle. So we know that exercise and social connectedness, probably through signals that the brain sends down towards the system, can also influence this. So summary that we can't change the operating system, but we can modulate whatever we got early on in life in significant ways by having a healthy lifestyle that includes diet, but also other factors. So the model that we've been working with, it's a systems view of these brain-gut microbiome interactions. You have a circular interactions. The brain can influence the gut in a major way. The gut can interact with the microbes in the bidirectional way. And the microbes can feed back to the brain with their metabolites. But the brain can also exert a major influence on the microbes directly. And I'll show you a couple of examples. So what are the predictions from a systems view of that? So this is better understood really if you talk to an engineer. The engineers are really good in talking about system science and what the properties are. So once established, the system is stable and relatively resistant, resilient to perturbations. Everybody in this room has been exposed to antibiotics as an adult. You probably had a relatively minor effect on your system of this microbial system. You can go fasting for for a week, starving the microbes. When you eat again, they will come back the way they were before. Even people that undergo this C. difficile colitis that wipes out most of the microbes, by some miraculous way, it can be reconstituted from some memory that's in our gut. So it's a very resistant and resilient systems. This also implies that most therapeutic interventions in the adult have small and transient effects on the system behavior. Mentioned the antibiotics, also fecal microbial transplant. Even though it works well once you knock out the normal system in C. difficile colitis, it's not working well if you have an intact ecosystem in the gut. And efforts have been made for in IBS, in IBD, in obesity, in autism spectrum disorders, and it doesn't work well. It's kind of amazing, but explainable by the stability of the system. Another thing, most individual acute perturbations in the adult have relatively little effects on the system output. Just showing a few examples again. It doesn't matter when you're stressed, even though during stress you change your microbiome composition and metabolites. When you get back into a relaxed state, it will bounce back to that same system. And then there's another property that any system that has these feedback loops, so one from the brain and then to the gut and from the gut to the brain, exhibits oscillations. It's not a stable, static, it's not a static system. And there are variations diurnally, food-related, and seasonal, and I'll show you one example for this. This has become very clinically relevant because, as probably some of you know, intermittent fasting has sort of become different forms of that. It's become a popular concept that people that do it think it's the best thing if you want to lose weight and maintain your lower weight. What this shows you, this paper from the Weizmann Institute in Tel Aviv. So you have, this is again the gut cross-section, the microbes that are in the lumen of the gut, the ones that are adherent to the epithelial layer and can directly communicate. These are the different phases: the dark phase, the light phase, dark phase, which was kept constant in these animals, what's called regular in these animals. So what you can see is during the dark phase, you have almost the disappearance of these. Actually, 12. You almost have a disappearance of these microbes that are close to the epithelial layer. During the eating phase, you see the microbes coming back, and this repeats itself. So during the dark phase, you have this increase in these mucosally adherent microbes, and then they disappear again, almost like completely wiped away from the surface of the gut. So when we, I mean, the main thing about this rhythm is that mice obviously don't eat when it's light, so they have the reversed cycle. But as humans, when we sleep, we get into a situation that is shown here, where these microbes pretty much disappear and don't continue to signal, and they come back in the morning. So what is happening with this time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, that you want the system to oscillate between this state and this state? Most of our modern lifestyle is, so you eat much longer. You have kind of wiped out this distinct separation between fasting, physiological fasting, and eating. You come home, you have dinner, you sit in front of the TV, you eat snacks, you have wine, and so you give this phase a much shorter time than it would normally be if you had a 12-hour sleeping rhythm. So what these diet approaches do is they try to bring it back to you have a 16-hour fasting period, which basically means you don't eat anything after 7, you skip breakfast, but everything else can stay the same. And you will shift the system back into its normal oscillatory state. It's also been shown, at least in mouse experiments, that a disruption of the circadian rhythm plays a big role in the development of obesity and metabolic syndrome. So people that are particularly affected, that do a lot of traveling between time zones and totally mess up their normal rhythm, this has been shown there's an increased risk of metabolic syndrome. So some of us who do that, unfortunately, professionally, to travel between time zones constantly, are exposed to it, as well as shift workers like nurses who are also challenge this physiological rhythm. And this is important because if you look at this now, this is the nighttime, this is the daytime. You see that you have different differences in these what's called mucosal associated bacteria. They can interact closely with the microbiome. This affects gene expression profiles in the gut. So this is not just happening with the microbes. They signal to the gut cells, change their gene expression profiles. The signals go into the circulation and reach other organs like the liver and the brain. So this circadian cycling and the shifting between feeding and eating has major effects on our homeostatic system. It's only sort of been recently this has come into focus, both therapeutically but also from a research standpoint. So like many ecosystems, the more regular it oscillates, the healthier it is for the system. So what happens during stress? I told you acute stress has a very small effect on this complex system. But what happens under chronic stress? So if you look at this concept, so the stress can be directed at the brain, disease-related, environmental, or it can be directed at the gut, infections, diet, antibiotics, toxins. And we can sort of conceptualize this and see what is the output of the overall system. So when you have a stress on one part of it, on the brain, it doesn't stay in the brain. It will affect all the other components that are in this complex system. The same, the gut. If you perturb the gut, it will influence the brain and behavioral functions. We should give a couple of examples about stress. So stress does a lot of things to the home, to the environment in which the microbes live. I won't get into the details of this, but in decades of research, all these have been shown to be modulated by stress. An important one, for example, regional motility or transit times in the gut will change the habitat of the microbes. And if it increases the motility and decreases the transit time, you will have fewer microbes in that environment. But there's many other, including the immune system. Another study that showed a pretty substantial effect of stress, again in a mouse model, on both the gut microbial composition, but also on the downstream effect of what the microbes produce. So in this model of chronic variable stress in mice, they found that this had a major effect on the microbial abundance with a decrease in lactobacilli. So lactobacilli play a major role in tryptophan metabolism. So this molecule we talked about earlier plays a big role in serotonin synthesis. Lactobacilli produce a substance, hydrogen peroxide, that inhibits an enzyme that turns tryptophan into another substance with an unpronounceable name, kynurenine, that has been shown to have many negative effects on the nervous system, including neurodegeneration, neuroinflammation. And in this particular model, they also showed that the behavior of these mice, called the depression-like behavior, increased in parallel with a decrease in the lactobacilli. So the stress acted on the behavior indirectly through influencing what the microbes produce. In this mouse model, unfortunately, we can't do this in humans. This has always been the big hope of people that want to sell probiotics. It could be completely reversed by giving back missing lactobacillus. So in these mice, when they're stressed, if you give them the lactobacillus as a supplement, it will reverse these changes. Unfortunately, this is not so easy in humans. Another aspect of stress is really intriguing, that stress also can have a direct effect on the microbes themselves. So one is on the environment and the habitat. The other one is directly on the microbes. And so you all know that when we stress, our heart rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up due to release of norepinephrine. Now we also know that norepinephrine doesn't stay in our body, but it leaks into the lumen of the gut and interacts with what's called adrenergic-like receptors on microbes. And it changes the behavior of these microbes. So when you're stressed, your microbes behave differently. So they don't just change in their distribution and relative abundance, they also behave differently. This has been shown for many pathogens, for example, that they become more aggressive and virulent in attacking the host. So when you get a gastroenteritis, you better don't be stressed, because there's a likelihood that it's going to last 2 or 3 times as long and you have much more severe symptoms. And that's related to this mechanism. It's been studied mainly in farm animals when they're taken to the slaughterhouse, where these enteric infections are very common. So for the sake of time, I think I'm just going to leave it at that and skip over a series of slides that go through all these individuals, what we know so far. But because of a lot of animal data and a few slowly growing data in humans, changes in the microbiome, a so-called dysbiotic state, have been implicated in a variety of brain disorders, from depression, autism spectrum, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. Just a couple of words to this. There's growing evidence from humans now that in depression, the microbes are actually involved. And you can see this on this previous mouse study. We may know the mechanisms by which this happens. Autism spectrum disorder, definitely an alteration in the microbiome composition that has been demonstrated and in mouse models can be reproduced. There's even an open label study with fecal microbial transplant in kids with autism that surprisingly had a follow-up study just last week, where they found that after several months of this open label intervention, the kids were still less symptomatic that received it. So that's ground for optimism. Parkinson's disease, in multiple sclerosis, it's a different mechanism. Told you this early programming of the operating system, interaction with the immune system plays a major role. This, I think, is pretty much established also in humans. So the increase in various autoimmune diseases, including multiple sclerosis and food allergies, is thought to be related to this faulty programming of the immune system, and the interactions with the microbes are implicated and play a significant role. So I'm going to skip over a series of slides here. I'm sure you would be interested to hear about this. So there's a lot of examples from humans now. The summary of that is that these microbial changes don't cause these diseases. They're modulatory factors. If you start out with looking at healthy individuals, asymptomatic, with genetic susceptibility or vulnerability to one or more what we call polygenic disorders that require multiple genes, most of these people stay healthy, but if something happens to their microbiome, the interaction of this genetic vulnerability with the dysbiotic state is likely to enhance the risk of these people then developing an actual disease. What percentage that is, we don't really know, but it's certainly not a one-to-one. So if your microbiome is compromised, there's no guarantee or no need to worry that you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease. It's one modulatory factor. And the factors in the environment that play a role in this are these triggering factors: chronic infections, chemicals, so pesticides, diet, and stress. So we can't change this part, but we clearly have ways of influencing these environmental trigger factors. So let me use the last 2 minutes, and again, I'll skip over some of the slides about diet and the microbiome system. So this is, in the meantime, fairly well known to a lot of people from the lay press. So if somebody is on a healthy diet with a high nutrient to calorie ratio, which is typically a diverse plant-based diet, high in fiber, polyphenols, polyunsaturated fatty acids, we have an intact mucus layer, and I told you this before that this is part of the barrier function. We have an intact, tight epithelial layer. We have immune cells that are produce anti-inflammatory cytokines like IL-10, and we have a highly diverse microbiome with high abundance of certain microbes that, for example, play a big role in production of the mucus layer, like this Akkermansia, eosinophilia. So what happens if we switch, and probably, I don't know the percentage in this room, probably 30-40% would be in this category. So on a diet with a low nutrient and high caloric ratio, so these are high fat diets, low in fiber, high in refined carbohydrates. Several things happen. So the abundance of the microbes decreases, particularly of some of these organisms that produce the mucus. The microbes get closer, because the mucus layer shrinks, get closer to all these sensors in the epithelial layer, and there's probably hundreds for microbial products. This will lead ultimately to a decrease in the tightness of these junctions, and overall the combination of decreased mucus layer thickness and quality and increased permeability of the epithelial cells leads to a compromised gut barrier with activation of the immune system in the gut, which then distributes systemically and affects other systems in the body, probably all systems from the cardiovascular system to adipose tissue, but also the brain. And this process, this chronic immune activation, starting in the gut, to a large degree influenced by our diet, leads to these to a state that now a lot of people think, and in science, everything that seems simple is usually not true at the end. That this chronic immune activation is sort of the answer to a lot of our chronic diseases. It may be true, but being a scientific skeptic, I think time will confirm that. Showed you this slide earlier without the diet. So this complex system is directly influenced by what we feed our microbes. We currently, if you take a single supplement with a single substance, like here, it's at a high concentration, or the same with a probiotic, it's most likely not going to have the same effect as this, system that has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. It's probably one of the most intelligent systems in our body. And we know, so again, I'm going to skip over this, we know largely plant-based diets have the greatest health benefit. So I hope there's nobody in here that is a proponent of a ketogenic or a paleo diet. Always surprises me that there's still people that propose that as the optimal diet in view of the overwhelming evidence. Many studies, large-scale studies, that have shown the same, came to the same conclusion, not necessarily specific to the Mediterranean diet, but to any diet that is largely plant-based. There's also studies that this affects directly the brain, so not just the overall health, but has direct structural effects on the brain in older subjects. One example from studies that we know, such a diet will affect the glial cells, these immune-like cells in the brain, and change their, called the phenotypic state of these cells, being incompetent or being incompetent, producing a lot of cytokines, again playing a role in this neuroinflammation. So there's many mechanisms that have been implicated. So the high ratio of plant to animal-based foods, same for fats, high percentage of omega-3 short-chain fatty acids, high concentration of polyphenols from olive oil, red wine, nuts, and fruits. And again, the microbiome comes in here because it plays a major role as an interface between these dietary benefits and what happens to us. Health-wise, the breakdown products of many of the foods, the plants that we eat, including these healthy polyphenols, or also called antioxidants, a minimal amount gets absorbed in our small intestine. The majority is broken down by the microbes and produce these health benefits. I showed a couple more, so I'm a few minutes over, a couple more slides on this. So I think when we think how important the plant-based food is for microbial health in many aspects, and how the microbial health plays a key role in transmitting widespread effects on our body, including the brain, it's obviously important where these plants come from and what they have been exposed to. Not every plant that looks the same contains the same amount of nutrients. So I'm thinking particularly about these polyphenols. A plant that's grown with chemical fertilizers does not have the same amount of polyphenol concentrations. It may look beautiful, twice as big as, so for example, blueberries. You can buy these gigantic blueberries that may be completely depleted in these health beneficial molecules, because what they produce is an interaction that they have with the soil. Shown here, so I highlighted the involvement of polyphenols in the interaction of a plant through its root system with the microbes in the soil. And this is an amazing concept, that the interaction of the microbes with the root system plays a big role in plant health. So when the plant is sick, sends a signal to the roots then communicate that to the microbes. The microbes produce these same polyphenol molecules that the plant transports up into its leaves and fruits and berries as the plant's own medicine. So when we, and chemical fertilization interferes with that process in the soil. So when we eat something that's grown in a regenerative organic soil without chemical fertilizers, it will have a lot more of these molecules in its berries and nuts. Good example, I once was in Italy, a friend of mine, actually, whom I'm going to visit tomorrow. He harvests olives from 800-year-old trees that he sort of acquired because people are not really paying attention to those trees. When he harvests the olives, these are all healthy trees. When he harvests the olives, he measures the polyphenol content right after harvest, and it's several-fold higher from any other olive oil that you could buy. So a good example that how the plant, these trees have probably survived and stayed healthy because they have produced a optimum amount of this medicine, this plant medicine themselves, and we can transfer it to our human benefit. So I'm going to end with this. So there has been a connection, so closing the circle really. I don't know if anybody in this audience has read this Lancet EAT report, where it's been clearly indicated this integrated relationship of planetary health with individual human health. In short, the conclusion is, in order to make food production sustainable into the next decades, it has to shift towards a plant-based diet. Otherwise, the effects on climate change would be unavoidable. So transformation in healthy diets by 2050 will require substantial dietary shifts. Global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes will have to double, and consumption of foods such as red meat, sugar will have to be reduced by more than 50%. Conclusion, a diet in plant-based foods and with few animal-sourced foods confers both improved health and environmental benefits. So this report, I would highly recommend everybody to read, has been attacked, to my surprise, by a lot of people on social media, but also by aspects of the food industry. And it's been criticized because they say it's been subsidized by Monsanto and all kinds of evil companies, which is actually not true if you go back to the sources of this. A fairly independent commission of very well-respected scientists, including Walter Willett from Harvard Public Health School. I think this is a beautiful example that we now have rationales for medical reasons, for gut health, for brain health reasons, but also now for planetary reasons, that the shift towards such a diet is absolutely unquestionable and will have to happen if you want to stay healthy and avoid catastrophic climate change. So my last slide, I've started as a reductionistic trained gastroenterologist who didn't have not even an hour of education in nutrition, which I still find amazing, still the same thing today. And really through this microbiome science, and I would say microbiome science is, if you had to pick one reason why it's so important, is because it has shifted the mindset of people involved in it towards this ecological, holistic worldview, which takes it all the way from the molecular basis to planetary health. And I hope it's become like a mission of mine to convey this message. I don't do it at UCLA because UCLA is too molecular and too reductionistic. Nobody's interested in that really. But I think talking to audiences, international audiences, I think people are really receptive, particularly younger people are very receptive to this concept. So thanks for your attention. Sorry, I've gone over time.
All right, we're going to do questions now. If someone would help me with some microphones by passing out, Misha, can you help me? Questions?
Hi, are there any commercially available gut mapping options at this point?
Well, there's several, and on my disclosure slide, I showed that I'm on the scientific advisory board of several of those. So I have a direct insight in what that field is. I don't want to say anything negative about this. I think it's a very exciting approach. Some of these companies are further along than others. A company called Ubiome, Day 2, which was founded by the people that did these diurnal variation studies from the Weizmann Institute, which basically testing will give you an indication if you have metabolic syndrome and diabetes, what diet is optimal for you, and they base it essentially on their microbiome assessment. That will be available by prescription very soon. So they've provided probably the best science of all of these. The others are on their way. The principle this is based on, that they collect hundreds of thousands of samples from different patients and then apply artificial intelligence supercomputers to extract information that is custom tailored to particular subgroups of individuals. So I think it's not quite there yet, but I would bet my money on it, or if I had sufficient money to do this, invest in these companies, because I think this will be an essential part of medical assessment that you don't have to see a doctor for. The problem right now is there's so many out there that offer these services. I don't see a patient in my clinic who doesn't come with one of these reports. And I would say they're not scientifically supported, or the conclusions that they make from these is scientifically supported. I think ultimately it's big data science, and for that it takes a while before you get all these numbers together. But I think it's going to be a great way. You don't even have to go to the doctor. You can do this at home. So that the concept is you would order this online and do it at home.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. You mentioned the role of antibiotics in affecting the long-term gut health of young children or babies, or whether they're fetuses. I wanted to ask if you know of any current research that is seeing any type of intervention that can restore the microbe population, especially for patients who absolutely need these antibiotics when they're young.
Yeah, so the current thought is that in the West, we have decreased our diversity of the microbial ecosystem by about 40%. So this goes along with the same number that we've done to our natural environment, external environment. And the thought is that within a certain bandwidth, you can compensate for that by healthy diet, plant-based diet. But you cannot bring back the organisms that have gone extinct, just like extinct species in the external environment. There's a lot of efforts, and this extinction probably happens fairly early, because they have compared the children of Yanomami Indians on the Orinoco River, infants with North American infants, and even in the infants in North America, there's already this 40% decrease in the diversity. So the big challenge, and people are working on this, is there any way, like fecal microbial transplant, ingestion of microorganisms or consortia of microorganisms that would bring back these extinct species? And one of the most interesting approaches is that you would have to do this early on in life, and not from the mother, because the mother already has this decreased diversity. So you'd have to do something, a synthetic mix of microorganisms that is able to reconstitute during development this diversity. And there are efforts to actually do this. It will take a while. It's risky if you do something to a 3-year-old infant. What could be the long-term consequences? But if you listen to Martin Glaser, who's written the book The Missing Microbe, when he gives his talks, he is extremely concerned about if we don't find a way to change that, where this will take us. Look at any other ecosystem in the natural world. If the diversity goes down to a certain level, there's catastrophic events. The stability disappears. And that could happen to our microbial ecosystem as well as to our external. So the interesting thing to me is that this is happening in parallel inside of us as it happens outside of us, in the soil, and with animals, diversity around us. So right now, not a good way. I think still eating healthy is the only way you can do, but you will stay in a certain bandwidth. You'll not come up to the optimal diversity.
Yeah, and follow up to that, I'm concerned that we are turning this whole thing into another intervention. Okay, how to treat this. So we need to get to the place where we don't need to really treat this. And maybe we can let the kids run out in the yards and not tell them not to eat the dirt and drink the rainwater.
But it's actually beyond the dirt. I think, so we now know that nutrition of pregnant mothers plays a big role in, and that could be really the missing link. These Yanomami women have this high diversity, and their infants have it, because of what they eat. I mean, they have a largely plant-based diet. Even though they're surrounded by hundreds, thousands of different animals, they don't overeat. They eat their manioko and their roots and tubers. So it's quite possible that interventions in healthy pregnant mothers could do a big part of this job, which would be the way, probably should be looking at. Yes.
Thank you. Based on your information, you said that those bacteria are very important for our GI environmental. But what do you think about the chemo treatment? And also, those are very toxic. And also, for example, Lyme disease, people usually treat for more than a month with antibiotic. So in that case, are we in the wrong direction treating patients?
Yeah, so I've seen patients with Lyme disease who have been on 5 years of broad-spectrum antibiotics. At some point, we're thinking about doing a study and analyzing their gut microbiome. it must be greatly degraded. And what role that plays in the chronicity of this disease, we don't really know, because I mean so it's quite possible this is a vicious cycle. If they start out with one problem, then you decimate their gut microbiome. That feeds back to the brain and makes it a more chronic and resistant problem. It's just my guess. I'm not an expert on Lyme disease.
How about the temperature?
Yeah, this is a whole other story, an exciting story that has kind of emerged recently, that the microbial composition relative abundances appears to be a predictor of some forms of cancer therapy. And it's pretty clear that chemotherapy will probably wipe out, it's not been studied, will wipe out a lot of these microbial species. But it's really the immunotherapies that appear to be predicted by the baseline state. So I think people have started in oncology to look at that as a factor that could predict the outcome. So that's an area, it doesn't involve the brain necessarily, but that may have sort of major implications to do a baseline testing of your microbial profile. I should also say one quick thing. So a lot of the science is based on the traditional, relatively old-fashioned way of studying microbes. It's the sequencing, so you just get relative abundances of microbes. You don't get absolute counts. You don't get the genetic content. You don't get the metabolites that they produce. This is rapidly shifting now to these other more accurate techniques. So I think a lot of the concepts that we have right now, based on this early phase of microbiome analysis, will probably have to be modified. I think many things that you've read so far may not hold up to these more elaborate and sensitive techniques of analyzing.
I'm wondering if you can comment on the role of the vaginal microbiome in any of these changes that we see with the diminished biodiversity. Is that something that has been studied? Is it connected to the gut microbiome in some way?
I'm not sure if I really understood that.
The vaginal microbiome, like, is that,
the vaginal microbiome, yeah. So that's a totally different ecosystem, much less diverse in terms of species, but highly diverse in terms of strains. So it's a different design principle. And so the vaginal microbiome is affected by stress of the mother, for example, to a significant degree. And in mice, it's not been reproduced in humans. If mice are mildly stressed, pregnant mice are mildly stressed during pregnancy, changes the microbiome. When the babies are born, they get inoculated by a very different microbiome than from a non-stressed mother. And that will affect brain development in these mice, where only the mother has been stressed, and the transmitting mechanism is the vaginal microbiome. The vaginal microbiome also may play an important role in other, like in human diseases, vulvodynia, interstitial cystitis that affect the pelvic organs. And that's about all. I mean, we've been involved in these kind of studies. That's all I can say. I think the most intriguing thing is that this could be a mechanism that translates what's happening to the mother to the infant by when the infant is born and goes through the vaginal canal, is exposed to a different initial set of microbes.
Padham's Chaudhry did this interconnected series. Were you part of the interconnected series videos that were done? Was Padham Chaudhry did this series?
Yeah, so I was interviewed for that. I sort of have a little bit of mixed feelings.
That was my question, was what were your feelings?
And I did it against the advice of administrative people at UCLA who thought that this was just an infomercial, that entire film, which it turned out to be, unfortunately. So it's, yeah, I mean, I didn't say anything. They didn't leave that much in that I said because it didn't agree with the commercial aspects. So Yeah, so that's...
Okay.
So you have to be careful. Some of these documentaries that are coming out now about, the gut microbiome and the mind-gut connections are heavily influenced by commercial interests and really geared towards selling products that fit into that narrative.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. My question is, what is your opinion of the low FODMAP diet? And how is that diet affecting the microbiome? And do you think it's a good idea that people with IBS and potentially other brain-gut disorders are trying that diet?
Yeah, so I do not recommend this. It's the worst thing you can do for your gut microbiome. It works temporarily because it starves the microbes, so they produce less gas. The problem in IBS is really the hypersensitivity that IBS patients have in the gut to many stimuli, including distension and gas. And when you look at it, so I emphasize this concept that your gut microbiome is programmed early in life. So if you go through this for a few weeks while you do it, yes, it will decrease the diversity and the gas-producing bacteria. But the minute you stop it, it will come back. So, and it's pretty clear now from comparative studies, you don't have to do that and then reintroduce certain elements later. You can actually do with an elimination diet where you use the patient's own insight and experience. If they don't tolerate something in a consistent way, some vegetable or something that produces more gas than others, they can decrease the intake of that particular item or eliminate it. It's much better, I think, to involve the patient in the management rather than kind of going to give you this standardized diet. And again, it's the word, you cannot stay on that diet because all the things that I said about what's healthy for the microbiome and the gut and the brain, you're doing the opposite. So yeah, I don't use it in my practice.
Okay, that's all the time we have. I'm sorry, I know we could ask you probably 5 million more questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
So we're going to continue. We're running a little bit short on time, so I'll make my presentation of Dr. Lavretsky a little shorter. I'm Mikhail Kogan. As Dr. Penn mentioned, I'm a medical director at the GW Center for Integrative Medicine and also assistant professor in Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Care, and also a founder of AIM Health Institute, who's happy to co-sponsor this event. It's a nonprofit that tries to bring holistic care to Medicaid and vulnerable populations in our area. So I have a very special pleasure to give introduction to Dr. Lavretsky, in part because we're sort of, there's not that many of us geriatricians and geriatric psychiatrists that really advocate for kind of a whole person care for the elderly. And there are probably so few of us, and you can count them on our fingers and toes in the country. So Helen dedicated her entire professional career at studying effects of mindfulness, yoga, tai chi on the aging brain and as a treatment, not just as a prevention. And of course, she's also seeing her patients at UCLA. There's a very long bio in that you can read on your own. She's got a lot of distinguished awards from areas like NIH, different grants. But personally, I find that not only are we connected through our geriatric ward, but we also both grew up in Russia many years ago, and so that gives us even more special connection. So with that, I would like to give floor to Dr. Lavretsky, who's going to talk to us about her research in how different holistic modalities affect the health of the brain, especially in aging brain.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for supporting this amazing center of integrative medicine here to Sun family. So I'll talk about mind-body therapies for mental health and aging. As Misha said, I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, and I spend quite a bit of my time working with older adults who are depressed or experience cognitive decline, memory decline, and their caregivers. And my studies center around this population. This is my disclosure slide, funding. So I'll talk about the use of mind-body therapies for treatment and prevention of mood and cognitive disorders of aging, the use of Tai Chi for treatment of depression in older adults, and then daily yogic meditation in caregivers and older adults with mild cognitive impairment. Now that we heard about the effect of stress on the gut, we might have a solution here for a person and his or her gut. So public interest in this area is tremendous. Time magazine has had like 4 different editions over the several years past about on the science of meditation, and it usually is accompanied by this beautiful image of this is an actress, Heather Graham, who's doing TM meditation, transcendental meditation, and she seems to be in the middle of the desert or on the moon, and she doesn't care. So the appealing image of this, I use this image when I teach to the medical students and undergraduate and graduate students, and I ask them, what is appealing? Why is this on the cover of Time magazine? And they come up with different descriptions. She's centered, she's peaceful, and so forth. So the main message of this image is that when we are not able to have any control over what's going on around us, and we're living in very stressful times, we do have control of how we react to that. We could develop this control better. As probably the crowd here who's attending the symposium believes and knows, Western medicine doesn't offer reliable strategies for management of chronic disease or disease prevention. They do a great job of saving lives, acute treatments, but not that much help in managing really complex mind-body disorders. Integrative medicine, on the other hand, provides a holistic view of health and wellness in relationship to environment. And everybody's using it. I'm from Los Angeles, and I live in an ivory tower of UCLA. I rarely leave it. But outside of ivory tower, everybody's using a lot of things that belongs in the domain of complementary and integrative medicine. Everybody has a masseuse, a massage therapist. Everybody has an acupuncturist, and so forth. And also magnet bracelets are sold on the street. So the use of chem is entirely out of pocket, most of it. And very few services and techniques are reimbursed by insurances. And it's in billions of dollars, and it's growing. The most commonly used chem approach includes prayer for health and megavitamin supplements. But yoga is catching up, and this is a recent interesting survey that is done every 5 years for the past 15 years. And in 2017, yoga was most commonly used complementary health approach among U.S. adults in 2012, 9.5%, and it jumped up to 14.3%. And that's quite a jump after a steady hold of how many adults are practicing yoga, increased by threefold in meditation, increased threefold from 4.1 in 2012 to 14.2. And that represents a cultural shift, which I think is related to generational shift of younger adults being more open to these alternative techniques or integrative techniques that older adults may not be as accepting of. The use of chiropractic increased from 9 to 10%. So that wasn't as much of a difference between two surveys. Women were more than twice as likely to use yoga compared to men, and 20% versus 8.6%. And also use meditation 16% and see chiropractors compared to men. Also, non-Hispanic white adults were more likely to use yoga, meditation, and chiropractic compared to, with Hispanic and non-Hispanic Black adults. The use of yoga was the highest among adults aged 18 to 44 years of age, while the use of meditation and chiropractic care was higher among adults, so 45 to 64. The currently aging, I work with older adults, currently aging population cohort is baby boomers, and they're the ones who sought gurus when they were growing up and were in their 20s and 30s, and they're the most open cohort of the recent years to using alternative and complementary medicine. I live in this domain of mind-body medicine that includes yoga, guided imagery, meditation, hypnotherapy, spirituality, tai chi, acupuncture, art, dance, music therapies, or expressive arts therapies. In terms of research priorities for this area is to enhance physical and mental health, manage pain, symptoms of anxiety, depression, insomnia, various disabilities, and prevention of diseases. Mind-body research is used to identify common and specific features that mind-body medicine produces by studying their effects on brain mechanisms, physiology, and psychology, as well as clinical outcomes of various diseases. It is very difficult to perform Western-type research by using Eastern techniques, healing techniques, because diagnostic approaches in the Eastern and Western medicine differ quite a bit. If you, for example, visit an acupuncturist, they would they would diagnose you by your pulse. They would measure meridian pulses, tongue. They look at your tongue and recommend therapeutic approaches based on that diagnosis. In the West, we tend to use average medicine, which means we study large groups of individuals with a particular disorder, and then we average their characteristics and their response to therapies, that it doesn't apply to an individual, but it's a characteristic of the group that we studied. So it's less individualized, definitely, compared to the CAM techniques and approaches. It's difficult to translate into the accepted research design and Western outcomes. And typically, there's a self-selected bias in those who volunteer for the study. For example, I run meditation and yoga study and Tai Chi studies, and patients and subjects who come in for the study already believe in it. They want to experience it. They think that it's going to make it better, and that increases placebo response. And while as a clinician, I don't care what makes people better, as a researcher, I'd like to know whether it's a specific or non-specific response. So in the West, these techniques like yoga and Tai Chi fall in the spectrum of stress diathesis, or a spectrum of stress-related disorders. And that's evolutionarily developed stress response in humans. We all go through a life experience, birth trauma, and subsequent traumas as environmental stresses by work, home, and neighborhood experiences, major life events, exposure to trauma of various sorts, and abuse. And we learn to perceive stress as a threat or helplessness or vigilance. And it's modulated by individual differences in genetic predisposition, developmental experiences, and behavioral lifestyle choices, for example, in consumption of alcohol or drugs, or smoking, our exercise habits, all would modify our responses to stress. And they would form physiological responses to stress. Typically, we're evolutionarily developed to maintain stability in our body, or allostasis, homeostasis, and that leads to adaptation. Let's say we're exposed to some kind of stresses, but our body modifies itself, including microbiome or stress response, and then it adapt to this change or this challenge. But sometimes when the stress becomes too chronic or too much, it breaks our back and we develop maladaptive response or allostatic load that is characterized by high blood pressure, high cholesterol, hyperlipidemia, obesity, and so forth. So all of our body and brain responds to stressful circumstances by modifying interaction between brain, autonomic nervous system, neuroendocrine system, or hormonal system, and immune system. And multiple chemicals in the brain and peripheral nervous system are involved in modulating this response. It's quite a complex response that involves mind and brain and body, rather. And all of the integrative therapies tend to focus on this overall holistic stress response and target some of the elements of stress response by modulating brain autonomic immune pathways of stress response. Since I studied aging, disorders of aging, I am interested in how all this complementary integrative therapies, mind, body, dietary, physical activity, body-based, and natural products can modify processes of aging that occur to all of us. And those processes are presented on a cellular level and include genomic instability, epigenetic alterations, and telomere attrition. You probably have heard about it, that there are biomarkers of aging, cellular aging, telomerase and telomere length in the chromosomes, loss of proteostasis, chronic inflammation, cellular aging or senescence, mitochondrial dysfunction. So all of these processes occur on the cellular levels that accompany aging of the body and the brain. And so this integrative therapies that are more holistic are studied in the context of this holistic effect on aging process. Another very helpful process that I study in all of my research is resilience. And resilience is sometimes defined, there are multiple definitions, but most often as recovering readily from adversity, depression, or trauma. And it can be enhanced and could be resulting in effective and positive coping with stress, turning adversity into opportunity for growth, typically. And there are specific techniques that have been developed as a part of psychological intervention, like hardiness or optimism training. Generally, all of this cognitive restructuring or reframing of your difficult experiences teaches you to see the positive side of things, silver lining, finding silver lining in all of the experiences. Glass is always half full, attitude of gratitude, count your blessings daily, this sort of practices. So complementary integrative medicine interventions come very handy because they address this resilience and can enhance it. As I said, resilience-enhancing interventions have this well-being therapy, learned optimism training, all of which focus on positive aspects of difficult experiences and promote a positive perception of challenges and opportunity for growth. The most easily modifiable factors that are not easy to follow, for example, if any of you have tried to be on a diet, you know how difficult it may be. But it's modifiable. You can do it if you put your mind to it. Diet, exercise, sleep, alcohol and drug use, spirituality, all can enhance resilience by creating physical and mental well-being. And again, integrative medicine comes very handy in that. These are some of the examples of therapies that have substantial evidence base. Animal-assisted therapy or pet therapy facilitates social interaction, reduces anxiety, by proposed mechanisms of increasing in beta endorphins, oxytocin, prolactin, dopamine, and decrease in cortisol. So they increase positive chemicals that are associated with positive emotions and decrease stress response. the negative thing about it that people might have allergies or infections from live animals. However, it's been used and studied. Similarly, music therapy and social interaction or exercise, music-based exercise, has been studied for anxiety, depression, enhancement of mental and physical well-being, social engagement, and improvement in communication by modulation of attention, memory, and emotion via limbic and paralimbic systems. So music usually evokes emotions, and that's how you access positivity in a person. Sometimes after stroke, when it's hard to get moving again, or a prolonged illness, music is probably the easiest to use a technique to start moving a patient to a more positive change. No adverse effects reported, so that's easy to use. It's been studied. There's an initiative by the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health to study effects of music on the brain and the effects on the health at this point. They have a special funding opportunity for this. Movement therapy, improvement on mood, in mood, concentration, and sleep via modulation of serotonin and dopamine. Again, very few side effects, if any. It's been studied and continues to be studied in aging-related disorders. Light therapy with melatonin for sleep has limited support, but also demonstrated some improvement in mood, sleep, agitation, and dementia and depression by entrainment of circadian and melatonin rhythms in the body and the brain. Various doses and some side effects occur with increased agitation in some subgroups. Acupuncture has been studied for cognition and mood, and aromatherapy, lavender, hops, melissa essential oils have been studied for behavioral psychological problems and agitation with positive effects. The studies, however, are very small in samples. So mindful practices, effect of mindful practices that can help in achieving mental and physical health, via stress reduction mostly, treatment and prevention of depression in high-risk population such as stressed caregivers, older adults with chronic medical illnesses, victims of psychological and physical violence. One of the mechanisms, direct neuroplastic effects in the brain across lifespan, shifts in conscious awareness of reality. Again, attitude of gratitude is cultivated via these practices, cultivation of well-being and compassion. There's a category of mind-body exercises to which yoga, qigong, and tai chi practices belong, and it's increasingly utilized for improving psychological well-being, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, obesity, depression, and anxiety. Characteristics of these practices is physical exercise executed with profound, inwardly directed, contemplative focus of awareness. It's non-competitive, and therefore yoga boot camp is an oxymoron. Mental focus on muscular movement awareness combined with a low to moderate level of muscular activity, centered breathing, pranayama, conscious breath, attention to the breath, focus on anatomical alignment, position of the spine, trunk, and pelvis, proper physical form, and lastly, energy-centric awareness that does not exist in the Western medicine awareness. So we cannot measure it, but all cultures talk about life force, prana, sekam, chi, or kundalini, which is the same thing, refers to universal energy that flows through the meridians, and that all of the practices actually are directed to reestablishing the normal flow or rebalancing flow that had some blockages in case of disease. So that's how it looks. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Tai Chi and Qigong. In 2002, we had 2.5 million Tai Chi users and 500 Qigong users in the United States. By 2017, it had risen a little bit, but not as dramatically as yoga or meditation. Low impact traditional Chinese martial art exercise with a low risk of side effects and a lack of drug interactions, improve health-related quality of life, physical and mental health conditions, may be effective in reducing depressive symptoms, I've studied it, stress, anxiety, and mood. Evidence is promising but limited for Parkinson's disease, traumatic brain injury, sleep disturbance, substance abuse, and cognitive functioning. So this is a multifactorial intervention. So it does multiple things. Definitely affects musculoskeletal strength, flexibility, and efficiency, breathing, concentration, attention, and mindfulness. Older adults come to be more aware of their body movement and position of their limbs, and it leads to improved balance. That's one of the mechanisms responsible for improved balance. Energy, visualization, and intention of allowing flow of chi. Physical touch, massage, subtle energy. Sometimes you massage in the morning to wake up your body in qigong practices. Psychosocial interaction, it's usually practiced in the group. That is another factor that contributes to the success of the intervention. Alternative health paradigm, philosophy, spirituality that comes with a diet, belief in certain diet or a certain rhythm, how to spend your time, what you invest your energy into, and then ritual, icons, and environmental effects. The group usually has a leader, or it's in some belief structure. For example, I'm a certified Kundalini yoga teacher, and we have a strict system of training and also lifestyle choices organization, you know, like vegetarian diet, and you meditate in the morning 4 to 6 a.m. And so you follow certain practices, and that contributes to overall health. Putative mechanisms promotes relaxation, decreases sympathetic output, reduces clinical somatic symptoms and benefits anxiety, depression, blood pressure, reduces levels of inflammation via CRP, reducing C-reactive protein, improves immune function and vaccine response. It's been shown in multiple studies, reduces stress hormones of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, HP axis, increases oxygenation of the brain and blood, blood levels of endorphins, positive hormones, and baroreflex sensitivity. And then the EEG studies shows frontal EEG alpha, beta, and theta peaks, suggesting increased relaxation and alertness, attentiveness. There have been a number of studies, it's growing, the number of studies, actually more than yoga studies for older adults, showing effects on depression, stress, anxiety, mood and psychological well-being, self-esteem, Parkinson's disease, substance abuse, and cognition. Many are growing in numbers of these indications, and with very few side effects. The sample size, again, in the studies is not large. There's not, as you can imagine, not too much funding is poured into these practices. There's no lobby, Tai Chi lobby or yoga lobby to get the money, but there's National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health that has, it's a smaller NIH, one of the NIH institutes, that has a smaller grant portfolio, but they are the advocates for these practices and fund this research. Yoga, a system of ancient philosophy, practices, and lifestyle, stems from Indian, Hindu traditions. Have also multi-component, has breath control practices or pranayama, specific bodily postures, asanas, and mudras, and meditation. A worldwide use for health. Really, the entire world has embraced yoga practices. In the United States, millions are practicing. If you look at the table from 18 to 65, not too much variation in how many millions are practicing across the spectrum of age. And it's picking up in schools, inner city schools, and so children and young adults are growing up with this in their lives, so they don't view it as alternative anymore. It's becoming mainstream with change in the generational culture. Yoga is practiced usually for general wellness, general disease prevention, improve energy, immune function, athletic sports performance, improved memory and concentration. And many report a reduced stress level, improved overall health, feeling better overall, improved relationships, attendance, and job performances. Biological mechanisms of yoga have been studied, and Chris Streeter and colleagues reported that yoga alleviates stress by counteracting imbalances of the autonomic nervous system by decreasing sympathetic output, which is stress response, and increasing parasympathetic response. GABA level is a chemical in the brain that is a neurotransmitter in the parasympathetic nervous system, was associated in the thalamus, correlated with improved mood in her studies. A review of 81 studies found that yoga surpasses aerobic exercise regimen in numerous outcomes like measures of health, salivary cortisol or stress hormone, blood glucose, fatigue, pain, sleep in healthy and clinical samples. And dopamine is another chemical in the brain that is associated with increased pleasure or motivation, was found to be associated with increase in brain's reward system with yoga practice. Here's the summary of yoga studies in older adults, quite a few for hypertension, a couple for osteoporosis, insomnia, stroke, dementia, diabetes, osteoarthritis, and healthy, overall healthy aging. Since I got into this business about 12 years ago, there's been a growth, a spurt in growth of interest in prevention of cognitive decline. So yoga is now been studied in multiple studies, including mine, in terms of can we use it for prevention of cognitive decline in older adults. This is a meta-analysis and review of yoga. Interestingly, in all of the studies from 1950 to 2010, only 18 eligible studies with a fairly small sample, 649, they were combined, and what the result was, yoga was positively associated with self-rated health status and aerobic fitness and strength. Not so much for depression, sleep, and bone mineral density, and not the effect on cognition. So these were older studies that used not perfected methodology, very small samples, and the results were not very convincing. This is MBSR program, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a manualized intervention for psychological stress and well-being. Again, meta-analysis of a multitude of citations, almost 19,000, included 47 trials with 3,500 participants, and mindfulness meditation programs had advantage for improved anxiety, depression, and pain, and lower evidence for improved stress, distress, mental health-related quality of life, positive mood, attention, substance use, eating habits, sleep, and weight. So, you know, for patients who are interested in these modalities, it's probably beneficial to add to the overall integrative management portfolio for those who are interested and open to using those. Mindfulness-based therapy versus mindful exercise. This is the paper I wrote with one of my postdocs recently, and we compared what brain systems are activated in yoga-based activities versus mindfulness-based activities. So unique recruitment for mindfulness practices in brain regions that regulate body awareness and higher cognitive functions, and in mindful physical exercise or yoga-based exercise, areas were activated that affected social processes and self-regulation. And these are the areas we looked at: prefrontal cortex in the purple, PFC, anterior cingulate, mood regulation and memory, and the green, insula, in yellow, sensory awareness of the body, striatum, reward learning and motivation, and amygdala, which is red, involved in the worry, fear, anxiety, fear response, emotional processing. So compared to back to back, mindfulness-based activation included premotor area, mid-cingulate, angular gyrus, and somatosensory cortex. Those are areas of motor and emotional and somatosensory integration or self-awareness, areas of self-awareness. Can be used for treatment of mood, anxiety, ADHD, attention deficit disorder, impulsivity, movement disorders. Yoga-based, so in mindfulness-based activities, mostly you meditate, you're aware, it's a mental processing. Yoga activities, based activities include a lot of movements, and that's how brain reacts. So you activate many more areas that are involved in movement. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, medial frontal cortex, superior temporal area, paracentral lobe, precentral and postcentral gyrus, and these are areas of judgment or discernment, memory, language, visual, spatial, and somatosensory integration. They're useful for enhancing judgment, self-control, deliberate actions, can be used in the criminal system, at-risk youth, substance abuse, mood disorders, neurological illness, cognitive decline, caregiver stress. So now I'm going to describe the studies that I've run. This is a Tai Chi study in 112 older adults with major depression, age 60 and older, who were recruited and treated with 10 milligrams of escitalopram, which is a SSRI, serotonin-based medication for depression for the first 6 weeks. Those who didn't respond or responded partially were randomized to receive Tai Chi class or health education class for 2 hours per week, for 10 weeks. And the results were that both Tai Chi and health education participants demonstrated improvement in the severity of depression, but Tai Chi subjects improved greater than health education group. Tai Chi also improved in greater than health education in resilience, energy and psychomotor retardation, physical functioning, and cognitive measures of executive cognitive function, attention, and memory. And that's how it looked. In red, Tai Chi, many more response, almost 95% improved compared to 75% in the health education group, which is actually not bad, 75% in health education group. And here they're improving pretty in parallel, but by 16-week, they separated statistically significant difference. Yoga did better in terms of reducing depression, improving, Tai Chi, I'm sorry. Tai Chi did better in improving physical functioning, and also this is verbal memory test. When groups separate like this, they diverge, and that's where you see the real difference. So this is a California verbal learning test, verbal memory test that declines with aging and in Alzheimer's disease. And this is a C-reactive protein that declines with Tai Chi practice and doesn't change, goes down, but then it comes up with health education group. So what else did I learn? Health education is an active control. They actually love it because older adults with depression are usually very isolated. So coming to university center for a group once a week is a big event for them. It's a social support. And that's why this is an active control. We want to know what social support and group activity does it. So it's like a placebo control for group effect. If you get people in a group, they typically love it. So Tai Chi, not everybody gets it. So this study was conducted in 2008 through 11. And if you remember, it was a financial downturn time. And I had a lot of depressed real estate agents in their early 60s who lost their jobs, lost their income, lost their insurance. They were forced to come to the study because they couldn't afford medical care elsewhere. And they didn't love it necessarily, but they wanted some help. So not everybody gets it. Adherence and satisfaction did not differ. But those who got it benefited greatly and also continued using it after we finished the study. And that's the gift of these practices, because once you learn it, it's a lifelong task. It doesn't require prescription or doctor visit, very cheap once you learn it, and you can use it when in stress. And I find that if we teach our children early, when they're 2 or 3, this is like a protective factor, that a lifelong skill. When they're encountering a stressor, they immediately go to this protective space. They know what to do: slow their breath, deepen their breath, go inside, like that image on the Time magazine. Center yourself, and then you're better positioned in how you react to stressors. So if we train young children to do that, our aging process will be much delayed and more beneficial, has a better profile than just demise by age 70. Putative mechanisms here via stress reduction, decreased inflammation, epigenetic changes. We are now doing a larger study in older adults with 24 months follow-up to see if these practices delay progression of cognitive decline. Yogic meditation, this was one of the early studies that I did, sponsored by the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation in dementia caregivers who are stressed. The one thing about caregivers, they don't have time for anything, especially for self-care. And dementia caregivers is usually middle-aged to older women, and they have multitude of stressors like taking care of adolescent children or driving in traffic, having 2 jobs or more, and so they really don't have time for self-care. So the one thing that the control group in the study was, they were asked to meditate for 12 minutes a day. They could find that. And the control was go to a quiet place, close your eyes, and listen to an instrumental music. We gave them music CD to listen to for the same duration of time. So it's 12 minutes per day for 8 weeks. And we measured the multitude of things here. Cytokines, cortisol, catecholamines, cognition, PET scan, fMRI, NF-kappa B, telomerase, and gene expression. So this was a very innovative first of its kind in humans. By then, no studies had used telomerase or gene expression. So this was like a gold standard, establishing gold standard for the field. Since then, this field has exploded. So we recruited 39 stressed caregivers with minor depression. They couldn't be depressed because we couldn't treat it. The new concept was, I have 20 minutes to myself in a day. And for many, it was a new concept. In their entire life, they never conceptualized this, that I have to take care of myself. What we asked them to do was, it's a chanting meditation, Kirtan Kriya, 11-minute chanting in the Kundalini Yoga tradition that people have been practicing for thousands of years, 5,000 years as a yogic tradition. This meditation involves repetitive finger movements or mudras. You tap each finger, close your eyes, you visualize L-shaped white light coming through the top of your head, in the middle of your head, and coming out of your brow point. That's a common meditative point when people use in yoga practice, meditation practice. Close your eyes, focus on the brow point here. And that becomes, after you practice it for a number of times, it becomes your safety place. You know, when you're stressed, you just go here and you're safe. And Kirtan Kriya means a song, Kirtan. Kriya means a complete exercise that is expected to achieve some outcome, certain outcomes. In this case, either cognitive improvement or stress reduction. And Satanam is a mantra that is used here, which means birth, life, death, rebirth, life cycle. And the Satanama has a voice inflection, a melody, Satanama, Satanama. And so you're multitasking, you're pressing your fingers, you're chanting, you're imagining light coming through your brain, and your eyes are focused here. And we see this multitasking aspect on the brain imaging, and that's why I'm explaining it like that. So they practice it in southern India for prevention of cognitive decline in older adults. So what happened over time, meditation is in blue, relaxation is in red. This is a statistically significant difference between meditation and relaxation, reduction in depression, Hamilton Depression Rating Scale. Resilience went up in parallel. This is not statistically significant. And that's what the power of conviction that I'm, by resting, it will help me. So this is, again, placebo. I believe it will be helpful. It's the power of belief. So on a mental level, on a psychological level, in both studies, this control group was very powerful. But when lines go like this, it's a real divergence in outcomes. And cognition here, mini mental state examination score, overall cognition, improves with meditation and declines with relaxation. This is telomerase activity, and that is an enzyme that takes care of the health of telomeres at the end of the chromosome in the nucleus of each cell. When we started the study, I collaborated with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got Nobel Prize for her work with telomerase and telomeres during that study. It was very exciting. She could not tell me whether we're going to see any difference or change over the course of 8 weeks, because it was the first study of telomerase in humans at that time. And so relaxation went down, which was negative impact, and meditation went up, and that was statistically significant difference. This is a group analysis of 64 genes that got activated between the groups. So we show the between group differences here. And in the promoter-based bioinformatic analysis, NF-kappa B related genes, about 40 genes that got deactivated in the inflammatory pathways, and about 19 genes in the interferon response factor 1, which is a positive immunity that protects you against viruses, got upregulated. So the practice of yoga versus control, relaxation, led to a positive balancing of the genetic makeup. So you're no longer a victim of your genetics. You can modify it by lifestyle choices. And since then, this field of social interaction and epigenetics has exploded. So this is an fMRI, and I live in the neuroimaging world a lot. So the network that got activated, and this shows the difference between meditators and non-meditators. Light blue areas show anterior cingulate, orbited, and insular network, which is self-referential network that allows you to know what's happening inside of your body. Like when you feel the air coming through your nostrils and feeling your lungs, that's what the awareness in the brain lights up in this area. And the group differences are in pink, and it's in the anterior cingulate area, which is responsible for emotion processing. So the elements of Kirtan Kriya, we also did the MRI analysis that dissected elements, but only tapping, only visualizing, or only chanting compared to the full meditation. And the full meditation activated bilateral temporal poles, known to be involved in empathy. And also what we showed, since the 70s, there's this concept of relaxation response. And it's attributed to all of the mind-body therapies. But the study was the first one to show that meditation is not equal rest. Meditation has neuroplastic effect, and it matters what you do in that meditation that activates different areas of the brain that has this neuroplastic effect. You're exercising the brain by moving your arms, by chanting, and by visualizing, or brain fitness effect. So we proceed. At that time, yoga was not conceptualized as a neuroplastic or helpful for cognitive performance. So then we proceeded with this next study of yoga for mild cognitive impairment to document cognitive effects. And by then, about 15 randomized clinical trials existed, 7 acute exposure studies, and yoga seemed to be associated with moderate improvement in cognitive function. But again, limitations of the field by then was smaller sample size, heterogeneous population, characteristics, various doses of yoga from 1 hour a week to 10 times a week. So it was very difficult to interpret the field. And so we recruited older adults over 55 with subjective memory complaints. Some of them met criteria for mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor for Alzheimer's disease. And then we measured verbal memory, visual spatial skills, executive function, mood, and apathy evaluation scale, and CD risk as a resilience scale. At baseline, 12 weeks and 24 weeks. Yoga intervention, Kundalini yoga class for 60 minutes, 8 to 10 per group, and Kirtan Kriya was a homework, 12 minutes a day, as in the previous study. The control was memory enhancement training, or gold standard for this population. That's how we try to make them better and prevent cognitive decline by training them to use various techniques to enhance their memory. And usually verbal and visual association strategies are recommended, cueing themselves. Same duration of intervention, weekly group sessions of 60 minutes and daily homework. And that's what happens. It's very interesting, actually. So yoga is in red, and the memory training is in blue. Memory training worked as long as we administered it for 12 weeks, and then it declined by week 24. In yoga, it continued to improve over the course of 6 months. So many ask why would it be? And it could be because of yoga practitioners continuing their daily yoga meditation and practice, and memory training practitioners not continuing. And we tried to compare it by their recall of how many practices they had per week. I'm not entirely sure. It seemed like the groups did not differ in the proportion of people who continued practicing versus not. So that's to be addressed in the future. Trail B in seconds, it's a time for completing Trail B or test. And yoga continues to improve. Memory training doesn't do anything for executive function, which is understandable because memory training is devised to improve memory, but not executive function. This is a depression scale, geriatric depression scale. Yoga improves significantly compared to memory training. Resilience improves significantly compared to memory training. And here, brain results in a subset of 14 yoga and 11 memory training participants. We looked at anterior cingulate and hippocampus here. And the yoga group demonstrated statistically significant improvement in depression, visual spatial memory. In both groups, we observed improved verbal memory performance correlated with increased connectivity in the default mode network. Improved verbal memory performance correlated between language processing network and left inferior frontal gyrus. And memory training and increased hippocampal volume. And I'll show you on the graph. So in the yellow, there are spots of a default mode network, and it's an evolutional network. All of our brains activated when we're at rest with eyes closed and our mind is wandering. So we don't have focus of attention. That's how those are the areas that get activated. In the red spots are the areas that correlated, show this correlation between the change in the connectivity in those areas and verbal memory task. And so these 5 graphs compare yoga to memory training, yoga in blue, memory training in red. And yoga, they're in the same direction, so the activated connectivity, improved connectivity correlates with improved cognitive performance in yoga more so than in memory training. So here's, as I said, memory training at baseline and follow-up increased bilateral hippocampal volume. It did not change in yoga, also understandable because with memory training, you are training your hippocampus, which is the structure responsible for forming memories, and no change in dorsal anterior cingulate volume. Also with yoga in hippocampus, choline, which is a chemical responsible for cognitive performance, increased with yoga but declined with memory training. So this was the first study to examine changes in cognition with yoga and memory training in MCI subjects, comparable changes in yoga versus memory training in memory performance. However, yoga had a broader effect on executive function, mood, and apathy and resilience. Both yoga and memory training showed resting state brain activation, reflecting improvement in memory. Memory training increased hippocampal volume. Yoga increased concentration of choline in the hippocampus. People love it. I don't have to advertise in the newspapers for the studies. It's word of mouth, and we have no problems recruiting for the studies. Non-pharmacological, again, Los Angeles may be a prime place for this kind of thing. So we got famous for the studies all over the world. The entire India and half of Pakistan rejoiced, saying we told you so for 5,000 years. I want to thank my sponsors and collaborators, multiple grants, Alzheimer's Research Prevention Foundation, and my multiple collaborators. It's a very complex group of studies within the study and requires a lot of expertise, technical, and especially my postdoctoral students who wrote all of the papers. And thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Helen. I would like to invite all the panelists up. Please take a seat here, and we're going to go ahead and turn these microphones on so you'll be able to talk. All right, so I'd like to get started by everyone just giving a brief introduction, background to yourself. We can skip Helen. I feel like we know her pretty well. So maybe we'll start with you, Scott.
I'm Scott Jackson. As John mentioned, sorry, I'm getting over a cold sinus infection. As John mentioned, I'm the leader of the microbiology group at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, which is about 20 miles north of here. I'm an adjunct assistant professor here at GW, and I help teach some of the courses for the medical school. And I think that's about it.
Judi?
I'm Judi Eskovitz. I am a patient of Dr. Kogan. I am also a yoga teacher, so I start teaching children at preschool, 18 months. So I teach kids in preschool. I have a specialty in yoga for kids with special needs, yoga for cancer, and then I'm also trained in yoga for depression and anxiety.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Barnard?
Yes, I'm Neal Barnard. I'm the head of an organization called the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is a nonprofit that does nutrition education and lots of clinical research trials. I'm here at GW. In addition to being a graduate of this institution, I'm on the adjunct faculty in the Department of Medicine, and I'm a board-certified psychiatrist and fellow of the American College of Cardiology.
And last but certainly not least, Mikhail Kogan.
I think I already introduced myself. I'm Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director at Center for Integrative Medicine and a Professor of Medicine here at GW, and I'm also founder and Executive Director of AIM Health Institute.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we're going to open up the floor for questions. Unfortunately, we don't have any extra microphones, so if you guys could just speak up, and if the panelists, if you could just reword the question before you answer it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is for Dr. Lavretsky. Thank you for such a great presentation. I'm especially interested in aging adults and the transition of care, especially after major life changes, like after being hospitalized, after being institutionalized. So my question for you is whether you know of any literature that supports the practice of mindfulness training in easing that transition, especially because that's going to be a significant impact on the public or on the health system in the coming years.
I don't know of any particular studies that addresses this particular stressor, but the number of mindfulness-based studies in older adults is increasing, with the primary attention at this particular moment on cognition and prevention of cognitive decline and all the stresses that are associated with that. And in caregivers, there are a number of studies of mind-body practice, various mind-body practices in caregivers. It's moving though. So the yoga therapists are now trained to modify yoga for older adults, and the prime population for them is assisted living facilities. So, and the assisted living organizations are also interested in integrating and inviting this sort of practices for their residents. So I think in the years to come, it's going to be addressed.
Good.
Do you know any assisted living facilities where they are doing some of these types of things for the staff? Oh, you talked about the caregiver aspect before, but those caregivers in their daily job.
So, yes, assisted living facilities and nursing home staff has been studied in terms of caregiver stress and burden. And I can think of like a couple of smaller studies that had done yoga for staff caregivers, professional caregivers. And so there's professional caregivers who are under tremendous burden. They have been studied, their stress and burden, and their family caregivers who are also stressed and burdened. And there are very few smaller studies for either population.
So this is to add on, and also kind of it's not necessarily a question here. It appears like some of this modality is becoming a pretty well evidenced. I think it's time to start getting them covered by insurance. Like a good example would be in assisted living. There's no reason why the Medicare cannot be billed for something like this if you absolutely can demonstrate the efficacy. So part of the question is, I don't know, Helen, if you know, or Neal, if you know, if there's any efforts on the national level to get actual movement on getting some of these modalities approved.
Yes, I'm invited to give talks to the yoga therapist organizations who are advocating for reimbursement Medicare. They usually start with Medicare. Aetna Medicare did a study on itself by having a yoga intervention for employees of Aetna. And that was because a vice president of Aetna was a yogi. And they showed that overall productivity in those who practiced yoga versus controls was significantly improved. And so there are movements within the insurance industry to kind of self-examine itself within the big employers. And I'm sure, I don't know how much it's happening here, but UCLA is very much into wellness, and various activities are happening on campus, and sometimes I can't believe it's happening. So the employers, and my husband works for Boeing, they invest huge bucks into covering preventative practices, and yoga and mind-body practices. So it's coming to fruition. There's another force. Academy of Integrative Medicine is also advocating for coverage for certain practices. So there's a lot of pressure. In terms of yoga therapists, what the problem was the field, and many similar, there was not a standardization in training of practitioners. And then yoga therapists came, and schools who certify and train them came together to establish this standardization. And that has to happen before any reimbursement will occur. And that's what happened with acupuncture and chiropractic care that is usually covered by most insurances at this point, maybe limited coverage.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the nursing home, do you need to train the employees to do yoga, helping the patients? I think it'd be tough. I've been working with nursing for many years. I don't know, they even don't have time for themselves. I mean, I think finance is a major issue. I mean, it's good to talk about it, but I don't know reality. How can you approach it? You know?
Yeah. So the way it works is this. Physical therapists get trained as yoga therapists, and then they bill under physical therapists. So it's manipulated. So we, at UCLA, we're going through this. How can we bill for it? And it's, now, at this point, the reimbursement is through the trained professionals who are certified to do other things, like massage therapists would integrate some of the yoga techniques, or physical therapists who are trained to be yoga therapists as well would integrate some of the techniques.
Great, thank you for those. I just want to remind everyone, too, that while these are great questions, we do also have expertise on this panel in the microbiome and plant-based diets. So don't forget about those questions, too.
Yes. This has just been incredible, I must say, and I don't know how to start exactly, except to say that I am a 41-year breast cancer survivor, and I'm a patient navigator that was trained at Smith Center here in Washington, D.C. I've been vegan for about 37 years, but I am also a substitute teacher currently in Anacostia. And I see the illness that goes on from infancy to aging, and it affects the Black community especially. So after 400 years of surviving here in America. So I'm really sorry that there is no one on the panel who can address that. Maybe my next life I'll come back and
I can actually try. I can try. We approached.
But I just want to say that we really always please try to include those of us who have suffered and are continuing to suffer from this. Like I said, I'm in Anacostia every day, and I see the effect of stress on a Black community.
So we formed a nonprofit, and we're currently trying to get DC Medicaid, and we're partnering with several organizations, including Bread for the City, which is in Anacostia. So we're starting to provide group treatments through DC Medicaid. So we're hoping that they will cover us so that we can do yoga, Tai Chi. So actually, it turns out that just what Dr. Lavretsky said, that under the code of the physician of physical therapy, you can do pretty much whatever as long as the physician or supervisor is in the room. And so,
in all the schools, that we need yoga in all the schools.
You know, I think integrative medicine is in the future. Conventional medicine only help you to treat the symptom. I never understand until a couple of years ago. I have a laboratory in Montgomery. I see so many patients come to my lab. They always tell me what their problems they are. And then look at their results. Oh, gee, what they're doing actually. I cannot give them idea or anything. It comes from interest, you know. But I see a lot of patients with no treatment. Actually, waste all our money, do nothing. You come to see the internet every 3 months. What they treat when they subscribe to you. Cholesterol medicine, blood pressure medicine, diabetic medicine, every 3 months. But lately, I contacted so many integrative medicine doctors. I think they're very useful. And nowadays, there's so many tests you can do, profile, see how good your body is, looking on nutrition purpose. I think that what refers to your question, maybe many things can cause your issue. Environmental, your food, you're taking medicine. So many issues we're talking. But how to prevent you getting worse and worse? I think the integrative medicine coming in is that, okay, we should look at a broader spectrum, not just looking CMP, CBC, TSH, or vitamin D. We should look at a little more spectrum, costly, but can be cheaper if we can really make it cheaper. But depends how much the company will make money. I have a lab. I know how much it costs. I know how much they charge. I think they touch arm and leg. And second is, I think we're in the wrong direction, but I do believe, I come here today, I do believe integrated medicine is the future. If we can combine the nutrition purpose and also combine the Western medicine. We're not only treating the symptom, but we have to, how to treat the cause, how to make you healthy, increase your immune system. I think that's most important, what your program is, right? Yeah.
And if the panelists want to address that, or if you want to take another question? There's a question. Or, sorry, go ahead, Judi.
I was going to just say, as a patient of Dr. Kogan's, I came to him with tremendous gut problems, which then led to tremendous anxiety and depression, et cetera, and I had seen other integrative medicine people who did not dig deep enough. And I was very fortunate to meet Dr. Kogan, who looked at me as an entire individual and actually looked at what A plus B plus C plus D. And working with him, probably it was took about 1.5 to 2 years to start reversing. So I think, at least in DC, it's just an incredible opportunity to deal with people like Dr. Kogan, who care about his patients, who really follow them. It's not only the treatment, it's also listening to what the patients are saying and not having a particular goal in mind and predetermined, this is what you need to be. He sits and he listens and he deals with different issues that come up. And I think that there's great hope that other physicians are being trained like this and are not just looking at giving pills to people, but letting them heal naturally as well as much as possible.
And they are, Judi, and I would like to say that a lot of people in this room are working on that very hard for exactly that reason. Thank you for that. Question?
Thank you. So a question that speaks to both of the lectures to some degree. I'm a child psychiatrist working largely integratively, and with kids who have infection and immune responses and triggers and psychiatric symptoms. And when we think about some of these bacteria or organisms that debatably are pathogenic or perhaps not pathogenic, is E. coli good or bad or whatnot? Can anyone comment on what we know from any aspect of integrative medicine, as anything we may know about to what degree, whether it's food or yoga or other aspects of stress that kind of anger the microbiome or certain organisms, or calm the system, so to speak. So when we're weighing this balance of, okay, do we treat with antibiotics? Do we need to do that? For how long? Can we just calm things down without necessarily changing either the microbiome or organisms that we think of as pathogenic, but maybe they're not so pathogenic? If that makes sense. Any thoughts?
I can take a shot at that. What I think of when I think of your question is, do we know what a good microbiome or a bad microbiome is if a person has, a psychiatric disorder and it causes a shift in their microbiome? Is that good or bad? We really don't have a sense. No one can point to a microbiome and say this one is good and this one is bad yet. Your point about pathogens versus non-pathogens, now there's a middle category that they've described as pathobiomes. So these are species of bacteria that are correlated with disease, but they may not be the causative agents of those diseases, but they're correlated with it. So quasi-pathogens. Companies like Ubiome that Emeran had mentioned, they've screened over 300,000 individuals, their microbiomes, and they have metadata on those people about their health conditions and self-reported information. And that's a very powerful data set that is proprietary, and they are pulling very valuable pieces of information from that and publishing on it occasionally. So there's hope, and we're moving in the right direction. I like to tell people in 10 years, when you go see your physician for your annual checkup, you'll give blood, urine, and stool, and they'll make some diagnosis from your stool, hopefully. That's the direction we're going. To whatever extent that helps with your question.
Good.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on that as well with two studies that ended up perhaps inadvertently connecting the body and the mind. The first was a 2015 study done by Stephen O'Keefe at the University of Pittsburgh, and you might have heard about this study on the news. He recruited 20 individuals from rural South Africa who were eating a largely plant-based diet, and recruited 20 more individuals from African-American individuals from the Pittsburgh area who were eating a mostly animal-based diet. And for 2 weeks, they effectively switched diets. And what they showed is that very rapidly, the microbiota changed within these groups, which is important in and of itself. But then they also looked at mucosal proliferation, which settled right down in the African Americans eating a mostly inflammatory diet. Within about a 2-week time, mucosal proliferation diminished, which means that your risk of colon cancer is diminishing, and that's good. And the opposite happened in the rural South Africans who were suddenly eating a diet with chicken and cheese and all these things that were not normal for them, and things got worse. We did a sort of a parallel thing here at Geico, the car insurance company. In Chevy Chase, it's their national headquarters. They got 2,500 people there, and so we instituted a completely plant-based diet for those people who wanted to join the study. And we used it as a control facility in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And we did it to look at metabolic outcomes. People who had diabetes and overweight, and exactly what you'd think would happen happened, is that people on a plant-based diet lost weight, their diabetes got under dramatically better control, and everything else. However, we also did back inventories on everybody, and which is an inventory of mood. And depression went down, anxiety went down, and job absenteeism went down. Now, is that because you're skinnier, you're feeling more energetic, and your hemoglobin A1C is falling, and so you're physically healthier, and that's energizing? Or are we rearranging the contents of your digestive tract, and that in turn is speaking to the brain in more optimistic tones? I honestly don't know, because we didn't actually collect any stool on anybody. But anyway, what we see when we do these trials, we're focused particularly on diabetes and metabolic diseases, but we almost always see the mood modifying at the same time.
So is this coming? Is the organization planning on starting to look into microbiome?
We are. In fact, we have been doing a couple of other trials. We did a large trial of hundreds of people who all started. They were healthy but overweight, and began a diet that was vegan, so no animal products. We keep oils low, and we choose the healthiest carbohydrate foods. And we have used Ubiome on everybody, and we do have the data on what changes in their intestinal tracts. And we are now doing a trial. And they're pending publication, so I can't tell you the results, but if we do this again, I'll tell you. We're now doing a new trial, which is really fascinating. We're comparing a vegan diet to a Mediterranean diet. And we had no trouble recruiting. Everybody wanted to do it because they could get both diets. And for 16 weeks, people do all vegan for 16 weeks. Then we put them on and then another group does all Mediterranean for 16 weeks. And then we weigh them, and we do their lipids, and we also we look at their microbiota. And then they switch, and they do the opposite diet for an additional 16 weeks. And I got to tell you, it's the most amazing thing to just see these people go through this experience. But the metabolic and microbiota results are quite interesting too.
Mm-hmm. Do you have the results yet?
We're halfway through the trial right now.
And it's a low-fat vegan diet, so there are people on it, and that was the challenge for the vegan.
Was it a low-fat vegan diet? Yes.
Yeah, it's a low-fat vegan diet. They didn't like it?
Well, vegan.
It was very challenging.
Vegan does not, by the way, doesn't mean you like folk music or work in a library or are a philosopher. A vegan diet means, all it means is you're not eating animal products. And so the second piece that we have used in most all of our intervention trials is we also keep vegetable oils very low. And then the third piece, particularly for our people with diabetes, is that we choose healthy carbohydrates. The technical word is low glycemic index. So instead of white bread, which will raise blood sugar, we'll use rye bread or pumpernickel bread. But it is not low carb. It's a high carbohydrate diet. And for all those people, all our participants are afraid of carbohydrate because they heard it'll make you fat. And they have to be reminded that carbohydrates are the most slimming foods you can get. If you can get away from the cheese and the chicken and the salmon and all these other things, you're going to lose weight quite dramatically.
Can I just add, just in collaboration with Emeran's lab, we ran a study of stool samples before and after of antidepressant or placebo trial for geriatric depression. And interestingly, two strains of microbiome predicted antidepressant response. And I had a discussion with Emeran about the results, and he has a similar result in CBT for pain. Certain strains of microbiome are associated with a response to antidepressants. And so I asked him whether he thinks there is a resilient microbiome that is associated with better resilience. And he couldn't answer. He says it's at the beginning of the conversation and to be established. Do you have any opinion on it?
Wow. I mean, that is like totally a shift of the entire, right? You would check the stool somebody's first before you prescribe the medication. And we do some of this genomic analysis already, where we look not necessarily at the microbiome, but we look at the human, human genes. And like in psychiatry, there's some prescription of antidepressants based on your liver metabolism. So we're moving into a whole new field of medicine, basically, nutrigenomics.
It'll be interesting to see, to follow up, if those non-responders that didn't have those species, if you introduce those species, do they then respond?
So that was my question. How do you? So apparently, Danone yogurt doesn't contain those species.
Right.
So how do you introduce those species? That was my other question. What do you do with this knowledge?
Right.
Absolutely. Sir, over here.
What is the value of probiotics and antioxidants?
That's a very tough question.
I'll give a very unhappy answer about antioxidants. The data is very clear. They're probably harmful, period. The only antioxidants, they are the supplements. Well, I'm assuming that was the question. But if the antioxidants comes as part of the food, they're clearly beneficial. So, and moreover, we actually think that pro-oxidants are helpful. Like when you're exercising, you're generating large amount of pro-oxidative stress, and then your body's natural capacity to clear it, that's what's causing the improvement. So it's a very controversial topic. The probiotics, I think, if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, I'd be a lot more positive in my answer. I'm getting less positive now. I think the probiotics have very specific roles, like prevention of Clostridium difficile is one and clear one. You can treat certain gut infections with probiotics, but it's not as overall as people just take probiotics for whatever. So, and frankly, I think it's clearly a future and it's a great idea, but how to do it practically right now is very unclear. And I think that the food is really the way to go, because you're supporting the natural recovery, and the other big issue is, think of it this way, that's what I tell all my patients. When you look at the capsule of probiotics, how many strains are in there? 10? 10 if you're lucky. I mean, probably 2 or 3. Now, how many organisms are in the gut? 100,000? 200,000? Like, really you're putting 10 in there versus 100,000? It's about diversity, probably a lot more than about a couple of specific strains. Maybe for certain really specific medical problems, some strains are important, but I would say, and panelists probably, some of you guys probably have some of to add on to this point.
If you don't mind, I'll jump in on that as well. I think of it as an analogy, or as you mentioned, you have many, many strains in your digestive tract now. And as an analogy, if you think of your garden, let's say I had some rose seeds and some tulip seeds, and I had some cactus seeds. If I want more roses, do I throw more seeds in it? You could. But if you use the soil that those seeds will do well in, you can choose effectively cactuses or roses to grow depending on the soil that you have. In your digestive tract, depending on the food that you choose, you can cause certain species to grow. and others to not grow. And so on a typical American diet, the Fargo, North Dakota diet that I grew up on, we have a very unhealthy microbiome as a result. And then when you switch to a more plant-based diet, as we've been hearing about, or in my case, an entirely plant-based diet, it fosters the growth of much healthier gut bacteria. So in other words, you're not taking the capsules anymore, but the bacteria that are naturally there, the foods will favor the growth of the healthy bacteria.
But if you have a lot of money to invest into some industry, that may be a good investment over here, because there are going to be some winners here. There's no questions there's going to be winners. You just go figure which ones.
May I ask, if plant-based diet is the best thing for anybody, what alternatives are there for people who are either averse, can't tolerate, or can't afford it? And probiotics are not an option.
Yeah.
Averse or can't tolerate a plant-based diet? You're talking about a plant-based diet.
In our community, there are a lot of neighborhoods where people can't afford fresh. So what options are there for people who may fall in any of those?
Like, for instance, if you live in a community where your only grocery store is a corner shop and they don't carry...
Okay. Well, I think you're really onto something, and let me point a finger of blame at the SNAP program, the food stamps programs, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's an important program. It feeds 1 in 7 Americans. I think it's vitally important, but it's, in my view, corrupted by the fact that I can be a SNAP retailer, and I can take your SNAP card, and I can sell you Slim Jims and Velveeta and steak and all kinds of things, and I might not even have any whole grains and vegetables and fruits there. If I could wave a magic wand and say that every SNAP store has to have vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans, even if they're in a can, at least provide them and get rid of the junk, and only provide foods for free that you are proud of, and I think you would make these food deserts disappear overnight. Now, but just to answer your question really quickly, we work with thousands of people in research studies, and everyone has the very same questions. What if I don't like it? And a plant-based diet means you go to the best Italian restaurant in town, and instead of meat on your spaghetti, you have tomato sauce on your spaghetti. Or you go to Taco Bell, and instead of the meat taco, you have the bean burrito. Or you go to a Chinese place, and it's rice and tofu or vegetables. So there are always choices, and people do find, usually within about 4 days, the foods that they really like a lot. It ends up being cheaper. A family of 4 will save about $1,500 a year, because go to the store, buy a pack of beans. It costs about $1, and that's 5 servings. So 20 cents a serving. If you get hand-rolled sushi from Whole Foods, it's going to cost a lot of money, whether it's meat-based or vegan-based. So everybody does go through a little bit of a transition process, but after they've done it for a while, they realize that it's quite palatable. It's usually really cheap, and it really can work for everybody. And the people who need it the most are the people who have the least access. We've got more obesity and more diabetes, not only in the African American community, but in economically disadvantaged communities wherever they may live, and we have to really pay attention to getting the junk out and the fast foods out and getting the healthy food in.
Also, it's a personal responsibility of an individual to know what's good for their body and make appropriate choices. We're all creatures of habit, but in the Western society, especially here, and especially dealing with organized medicine, patients expect to be fixed without taking individual responsibility for their health. And that has to change too. It's a societal shift that needs to happen.
Agreed. Go ahead.
A couple things. One, I'm a primary care doctor. I work out in Fauquier County, Virginia, which is like an hour and a half from here in farm country. And I'm like in the developed part, so I have people who come from 45 minutes out there because they don't have a doctor, because all the doctors are old and have retired. So I deal with the same issue that you deal with in the urban environment, but now it's just a flip of the demographics of it from that. But my training was all urban medicine. I trained in Philly. I did my residency at Providence Hospital, which is now closed because of finances. So again, a gap in care. I would tell you I never realized exactly how much it was going to help me to train here and then work there. My first foray into integrative medicine was with Dr. Kogan. I did a rotation right before I went into practice, and it totally changed probably was the thing that changed how I approach things. My background's public health, I like to teach. So if that gives you any hope, yes, it makes a difference to have these forums. I know Judi made a comment, you hope that there were more doctors like that. There are. They are hard to find, but trust me, patients are resourceful. And I also find in that area a lot more complementary medicine, way more accessible than I expected to find. And so I think one of the things that I think about now is how do we get everybody to kind of be in a network where you guys are doing amazing research, but like we're kind of in a vacuum out there. So, you know, I try to go to as much conference and stuff that I can, but so that's one thing. Two, the can't tolerate, won't tolerate of plant-based diets. Actually was on the phone with a patient on the way here who she has refractory Crohn's disease. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to get her to be able to get nutrition back into her gut that is completely fried, and she has basically exhausted her treatment options. And I'm thinking, what kind of medical food options do I have for her? Because I said, well, can we try to like puree or like kind of prebiotic digest it to make it easier for you to keep everything goes through me. So that's actually my end of the what do you do with it when you can't tolerate a plant-based diet. Because I'm having a hard time figuring out what to give her.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, in those difficult situations, use those mixes. You know, there are a number of quality ones. I mean, they're not healthy diet. I mean, they're a shortcut, but if somebody, you know, you take the plant-based diet that's high in fiber and somebody continuously having a short gut and they continuously goes through, which I have in my practice, probably over a dozen patients like this. It's very challenging. I don't have any answers. But, you know, I think what we're trying to separate here is, you know, prevention versus treatment. And also just the fact that I think the paradigm shift that has to happen here, we're often in medicine, you know, putting everything on protocols, right? And I feel the part of the tension of your question was, you know, what if somebody doesn't like the plant-based diet? Well, there must be a way to individualize that and maybe make it 99% plant-based, you know, or 98% plant-based. You know.
Yes, but to pursue this a little bit more, a plant-based diet means a diet that doesn't have animal fat and doesn't have cholesterol in it. And when you look at a Crohn's patient, you want to get them off dairy first. Okay, good, great. A lot of Crohn's patients never heard that, and they're suffering, and they're watching Humira commercials all night long, and so forth, and they've never heard about going on a plant-based diet. But a plant-based diet can be a high-fiber diet, which may be of concern at certain times, or it can be a very, very low-residue diet, just depending on the choice of foods that you select. So it's never a reason to go back to Velveeta and Spam, but it's every reason to, in certain cases, you're going to have to modulate the fiber intake.
We're also just trying to find things that will actually help her repair, right? Like I can put her on rice, but then what's going to happen? Like then she'll be deficient because she's not getting any nutrients from the diet. So I'm trying to figure out like what I can safely give her.
Yes, but she's not going to be protein deficient. Even if you have her on only rice for a little while, she's not going to become protein deficient or something. Yeah, but I mean, she's not going to. Rice alone is not a sufficient diet, but it's not as if she's going to become protein deficient or something like that over 18 weeks or 20 weeks or something like that.
So do you look at the blood to what kind of deficiency of the patient? There's so many tests now that you can really look at blood nutrition supplements, look at all the vitamins, trace elements. What is there block on the market?
But she can't afford to pay for stuff that isn't covered. So I did do a fair number of tests on her, but she's also being found here and ECU and UVA, and so, you know, she's always in a doctor's office, which is really not a good place for her to be to ever recover. She's not even getting rash. So it's a challenge. I mean,
I think the problem is that insurance not pay for those preventative care.
All right, I think we're going to move on to the next question.
So I have a comment about public policy. So, or a question. And first of all, for the societal shifting to occur, I think that people actually need to know about it. I don't think anybody knows about it. So I didn't know anything about being a vegan until 1 year ago when we started being vegans, because we read about Dr. Barnard and we read about Dr. T. Colin Campbell. So my question, so now we've been vegans for a year, and it's been very successful. But my question is, I know that Dr. Campbell is really upset about the commercial food industry and the effect that it has on public policy. So I was wondering if you might, Dr. Barnard, mention something or say something about what is the state of public policy for the general health of the American population, because I think if there was a public policy that was more vegan or plant-based oriented, I might have known about it quite a long time ago.
Yeah, me too. I lived half my life eating terrible things, and when I was a medical student in this very room in the 1970s, I would buy hamburgers upstairs and sneak them into Himmelfarb Library and study with them, and buy cigarettes across the street. So with that in mind, but I'm not kidding. We sold cigarettes in George Washington University Hospital. I bought them, and my head of surgery bought Marlboros, and we would light up going to the doctor's lounge. With that in mind, without commenting maybe on global politics, let me talk maybe about some local politics. About 300 feet from here is the hospital cafeteria, which currently serves sausage and bacon to patients, to the staff, to visitors, despite the fact that the World Health Organization came out 3 years ago saying that these cause colorectal cancer. And the AMA appealed to all hospitals in the United States to stop serving these things 2 years ago. If you agree with me that maybe we can adhere to the AMA policies and serve healthy foods and use the hospitalization as a time for maybe a teachable moment, maybe you could join me and I mean, is this a good idea to have healthy food?
I just want to add that they did recently take bacon out of the kitchen, so they're no longer serving bacon.
Oh, really?
So
That's excellent. That's great. That's wonderful. And the second thing is, during the time I spent in room 117 and room 101, the only time we talked about nutrition was when we learned the biochemistry of the vitamins and what causes scurvy. And I have never seen a single patient come into our primary care clinic that I run now with scurvy. I've been waiting, I'm ready. So what I'm going to recommend is that we really have nutrition not be an elective. I just completed 4 lunchtime talks to the first-year students, but it was just something the students organized because they wanted it. It's got to be front and center because your type 2 diabetes patient doesn't have a metformin deficiency, and your hypertensive patient doesn't have a lisinopril deficiency, and even your high cholesterol patients don't have a lipitor deficiency. They're eating foods that in 90% of the cases are causing their issue. And genes play a role too, but foods are huge. So what I would like to see is that nutrition be an integral part of our curriculum and that it be a required part of continuing medical education for doctors so that we have to keep up to date whether we want it or not, because otherwise I get a patient in my clinic who's been diabetic for 20 years and nobody ever like you, nobody ever talked to him about what a diet could do. And I've got to pick up after 20 years of advancing atherosclerotic disease, advancing renal pathology, their retinas are shot, and now I'm going to help you. I want to, but it would be a whole lot easier if my colleagues knew something about this. So, nutrition education, healthier hospital food, good idea? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I need your help with this.
I just have to add, I did not pay him to say that. So those of you who don't know me, I have a PhD in nutrition, and that's where my passion really lies. And one of the reasons I joined GW actually was to expand our nutrition education. And sneak peek, no one knows this yet, but we're going to be having a new integrative medicine nutrition master's coming very soon for just this purpose.
Wonderful. Great.
That's great. I think that's wonderful that you said that. I'm a physician here. But it goes all the way back to the education of children, and our school diets are so terrible. And again, that's a multiplicative industry, and that it's not just one school, but a whole district, a whole state, and so on. And of course, cheese, which you always talk about. But it's going back, and again, when you go to Anacostia, you have one giant in the whole of that part of the city, and everybody gets their groceries at the gas station or the bodega. It is criminal. But so I think the educational system has to go all the way backwards. But I also had a question for you on the microbiome. Given that there's so many species involved, how are you standardizing the ones that are important? If you can't use agar plates and just say there's so many of these growing, how are you, what kind of report do you give out if you get assessment?
Right. That's a great question. Nothing that's interpretable by a clinician, I can tell you that. It's a list of taxonomic names: Escherichia coli, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacter. What do these mean? These are just names, right? It's like saying you have John, Sarah, Tom, and, you know. I like to think about it as biomarker discovery. So, you know, cholesterol in blood is a biomarker, right? We just have to find those needles in a haystack. That requires well-controlled cohort studies, large well-controlled cohort studies. We're moving in that direction, but we're just not there yet. And in the microbiome, as you mentioned, because you have such a vast diversity, a vast ecosystem there, there's probably not going to be a single biomarker. There's not going to be a single strain that is the smoking gun. It's going to be an ecological network that works or doesn't work. And repairing that, I think, diagnosing it, repairing it, is going to be more than just one strain. So.
Great point. I just want to add to that. Scott and I were at a conference not too long ago trying to define what a healthy gut microbiome looks like. And as he said earlier, we have no idea because we can't really define. But the only thing we could really agree on was diversity. So that is becoming something that you can measure. I know Misha measures that in his patients. So at least you have some sort of an idea of how diverse their microbiome is. And that's the best marker we have now.
Yeah, that's the only thing I look at. You know, those tests are already there. And I think I totally agree with Emeran, you know, whether or not there is a lot of E. coli or little of it, it's not clear what to do with that, although there are some specific conditions on occasion where it could be applicable. But the diversity scores are now getting pretty standardized by even some, there are companies that insurance fully cover those tests, you know, or at least partially cover. So we're already beginning to implement. Should everybody do those tests? I don't know. I mean, you know, the problem is it's such a new area. And the research is so sporadic and non-systematized, and moreover, with the tension coming from the fact that there's no real medical treatment for any of this, the incentives are different. So I think the industry going there a little differently, but it's definitely new field of medicine coming, for sure.
And even though, I'll just add that even though DNA sequencing technologies is what enabled this, I think we're moving away from that because of the limited information that these DNA signatures can tell us, and we're moving more towards functional measurements, so like RNA gene expression and metabolomic analyses, so measurements, omic measurements of the small molecule metabolites. And what we're seeing, there's some burgeoning evidence that suggests that taxonomic composition is not conserved, it's just scattered all over the place, but function is conserved. So two completely different microbiomes at the compositional taxonomic level that look completely different. If you measure their function, they look very similar. So it may be a better route to diagnosis and understanding that structure-function relationship.
That's not in practice yet at all, right? I've never heard of those tests used clinically, right?
No. There's a company similar to Ubiome. They consider themselves a competitor. It's called Biome, and they do transcriptional measurements of gut microbiome samples. Mm-hmm. And they claim that they can make better conclusions from that, whether they can or not. But one of the things they see is what I just mentioned, and they just have a paper that came out recently in a preprint. And they show that taxonomically diverse microbiomes have very similar gene expression profiles. And it almost negates what their company says they can do. They say, well, we can get more information out of these transcriptional measurements, but actually if they all look the same, you're getting, what are you really getting out of it? It's an interesting approach though, but yeah.
So I have a question about pasteurization. So about the temperature, the point is to kind of kill off the bad bacteria or whatever, but I imagine that certain temperatures and methods might affect different types of nutrients differently. And so my first question is there good data about how those different practices might affect the diversity of nutrients, and looking at it more longer term? And the second question would be, what would that then mean for gut diversity in the microbiome? Because diversity probably has something to do with what you're putting in, the diversity of those nutrients.
I don't know, I'm looking at you, Neal.
All I can say, it's a huge, massive experiment on the whole humanity scale because, 100 years ago, none of this was done, and we were eating raw milk and all kinds of raw foods, which FDA right now would say you're not even allowed to eat it, so I don't know, I have no comment on the research.
I can take that one, actually. So pasteurization does have some effect on nutrients, and the how high the temperature is and how long they're exposed to it makes a difference. So that's why a lot of them are using this ultra pasteurization methods now, where you're just going really high, really quickly, and hopefully you didn't destroy that much. That being said, there probably is some loss of nutrition. And anytime there's a loss of nutrition, you're not delivering that to your gut, so there could potentially be an effect on the gut microbiome. However, that has not been studied, so we can't say that. I feel like if we're going to really talk about diversity and nutrition, what you really need to focus on is the number of plants. That's the only thing that seems to pan out in the literature, is the number of plants that you expose your gut to. So we don't break it down into the micronutrition, but like the more plants you can pack into your diet, the more different things you're exposing your gut to, and that's probably the best way to go. Doesn't really answer your question, but.
Well, I was just kind of thinking about it from the food stamps and canned food stuff, like, when you get like a fruit medicine there.
Right, so canning is actually not pasteurization, so that's one benefit, is that canning is only slightly cooking. And canned food, while it does lose nutrients, they're still there. Canned is better than nothing. That's the number one thing, and I teach the PA students about nutrition, actually, and we talk about that all the time, is we talk about organic and we talk about fresh and local, but if they can't afford it and they're not going to buy it, then it doesn't do them any good. If they can get a canned food in the corner store, that's what they should be buying, and we shouldn't have the bar so high. As long as they're eating plants, they're doing good.
What's your perspective on frozen? I mean, I usually say, like, I guess I had to choose, right? Because I'm also doing like a catch
Mm-hmm.
An unseasoned frozen vegetable method that's flash frozen theoretically should have more nutrition to it.
Frequently frozen is actually more nutritious than what you find in the grocery store, in part because of the transportation time. So sometimes what you find in the grocery store has actually been picked for like a week. It's been sitting there and degrading, whereas that flash frozen, they take it from the field and freeze it that same day. And it's a lot less expensive frequently, yes. And they don't have to worry about it spoiling. And that's something you might be able to find in a corner store as a frozen vegetable, which would be even better than a canned vegetable.
I think you probably can answer this, but DC Food Bank, I think, is taking a really significant steps to try to put in more canned and frozen vegetables in there. I visited them recently, and there's some definitely, at least on a local scale right here, there's some attempts to do that.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
I was wondering about food insecurity screening. You're going to refer patients to a plant-based diet. Are you screening for food insecurity? If you are, and they're positive for food insecurity, how are you referring them to access this food that they need?
I can just tell you what we do. And by we, I'm now referring to our medical center. It's up on Wisconsin Avenue, called the Barnard Medical Center. We've been there for 3 years. We always have a partnership where we have physicians and nurse practitioners who do what doctors and nurse practitioners do, which doesn't necessarily have to take a long time, and they don't do a lot of the nutrition teaching, but they have to validate it. And they have to say, you've got diabetes, I'll renew your insulin prescription, but the food is really important. Then the patients are always referred to registered dietitians. And the registered dietitians, in fact, I don't know how you could do a clinic without it, I have to say. We have four of them, and they all follow healthy diets themselves. And so they always do sit down with the patient, and they do go meal by meal. What will you have for breakfast? And where will you get it? And it can work for everybody. There's nobody who can't do a healthy plant-based diet, but everybody has kind of questions and wondering, and it's like going to the swimming pool and putting your toe in, wondering how cold it's going to be. But you do have to walk through all of these issues. Where is it going to come from? And what are you eating now? Because if what you're eating now is always at a fast food place, which is some people, then you've got to start making your menu as the healthiest choices at those places, or find some alternative. So I don't think there is any substitute for really going through it with each person. And then the other thing that we offer, the third step, after the doctor and the dietitian, we have free classes Every Monday is for patients, every Tuesday is for the community, and every Wednesday is for research participants. And they're in our office. They are free. And the participants can come for free forever. And they bring their reluctant spouse, and they're like, what are we doing here? But after about a couple, 3 weeks, they get into it. And you were talking about the group getting together and having this camaraderie and really getting with it. You could just see the dopamine going off in their brain with that group support. And we don't charge for any of that. And I think that kind of helps them solve those issues.
So there are some people in the public. I don't have much to add. I'm downtown DC. That's not much different. And in our nonprofit, we're just starting to get around those issues. But there are some people in the room who actually work in the community, and I want them to sort of comment. I think you and Marie, you guys, just what do you do in your own locations?
Well, I work at Women Walker and Anacostia Center and have nutrition on staff. And we do the food insecurity. All of my patients have food insecurity. They all have trauma. They all are, LGBTQ, a whole host of range. It's difficult. I mean, we do referrals for food banks, social services, work with them on like teaching them how to like good, better, best practices and what's available. But there is, Whitman Walker is moving to the campus of St. Elizabeth's in about 4 years, and we are going to have, I believe, partner with a food bank in the bottom of our new building to provide east of the river patients with more healthy options. But until then, it's mostly just working with what we have and working with the patient individually and making sure they understand where to go, how to go, meeting them where they're at. It's not a perfect solution, but it is being done. And I believe Family Medical, who's down the block from us, and Unity in Anacostia does the same thing as well.
All right, well, I hate to break up this conversation because I feel like it's fantastic, and I love all the passion about nutrition out there, but we are actually already over time, and we have a reception to go to, so we can continue this conversation a little more informally, get to know each other, and that will be upstairs on the 7th floor, so if you all want to take turns going through the elevator, or I'm not sure which staircase we can take.
Those telomerase measurements that you did, what part of the body was that? Was that taken?
I've seen your name.
Buccal?
Oh.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is our medical center. We're having you're a star in our Oh, okay. This is an event that we have coming up pretty soon. What else can I give you?
Oh, you got? Yeah, we do. Sure.
I want to add, actually, that one of my colleagues who's just down the hall from me, Miranda, I'm blanking on her last name right now, but this is all that she does. She is doing health equity, health disparities here at GW, and she's working on putting it in all of our curriculum. She was actually here earlier, and I kept looking for her to try and call her name out when you were talking, but she is actually also on the DC board here, trying to fix this. On the DC board, working in schools. So I'm trying to tell her, what's Miranda's last name? What is Miranda's last name? Ward.
Right. Yeah. They really need to step up more.
I know, and so yeah, great.
And most people say it. You feel like they had to go for a ride.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I know, I'm right, but I wonder if it'll ever happen.
I think it was.
Starting out, but yeah, I agree. Absolutely. You're just already first year now? First year from, I had a series of sessions.
We're going to do